إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another session of the Seerah. Today's lesson we shall be looking at Ibrāhīm alayhi salam. Now this topic in its entirety can be dealt separately because you can have the archaeological, linguistic, material side of it and then the spiritual side of it. And it's longer than what it is here. But for the purposes of our deeper Seerah study, we're going to have a look at the material evidence and linguistic and archaeological and religious evidence in this lecture, keeping in line with the rest of our lectures. The only reason I included Ibrāhīm alayhi salam, Prophet Abraham, is because all Seerah books, they start from Ibrāhīm alayhi salam and then they go down to the two sons, and Isaac became the father of the Jews and Ismail alayhi salam became the father of the Arabs later on. So this is the reason why I've added it, and I think you will all really enjoy it. So as we all were learning Seerah or are learning Seerah, we touch upon the story in the Quran and the mentions of Ibrāhīm alayhi salam in the hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But do we ever stop to think from which civilization did he belong? Many people think he was an Arab. Even the Jews at one point were arguing whether he was a Christian or he was a Jew, and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that he was neither Christian nor Jew, but he was of the Hanif, he was a Hanaf, he was a believer in the one God. But what was his ethnic origin? We tend to assume that everybody in the greater Middle Eastern area, which includes the Levant up to Egypt and then the Gulf proper, and even some people going as far as Iran, they think that everybody there is an Arab. In fact, no, we discussed this early on as well, that they're not all Arabs, and certainly in the time of Ibrāhīm alayhi salam, there were no Arabs there in that particular area of where Abraham was born. Now, we don't have much evidence to go by. We have the biblical stories, and then we have the scant mention of Ibrāhīm alayhi salam in the Quran. So we shall be looking at the biblical narrative and archaeological evidence and other evidences that we come across, inshallah, to put forward an idea of who Abraham was as a person, and his milieu, his ethnicity, and how he experienced life, where he experienced it. So straight away, we have a few names. We have the Amorites, the Elamites, the Sumerians, Assyrians, Akkadians, Hittites, and Egyptians. If you know your history, you'll know that these names, all of these civilizations and ethnicities and empires were around each other. So there's no need to say, oh, the ancient Chinese empire or the Indus Valley empire, or really those are the other two empires that you can include. Before that, there were no really, as big city-states as the ones we've just mentioned. The Indus Valley Empire was flourishing at that time, and then China, it was before the Warring States. It was a very long time ago, and even China wasn't an empire. It was city-states and small areas. So we can not talk about the Chinese, not talk about the Indians. Nothing else is really of much value here. If we look at what we have in front of us, from which of these civilizations did Ibrāhīm alayhi salam belong? So was he an Egyptian? No, we can rule that out. Was he a Hittite? No, we can rule that out. That leaves Akkadians, Assyrians, Sumerians, Elamite, we can rule that out because they were around the Iranian area, and it leaves the Amorites. Now, I will leave that here for a moment and we will touch upon it as we move along, but think about that. So We know that Abraham was from a city called Ur. We know this from the Bible. We don't know this from anywhere else. The Bible says Ur of the Chaldees, Ur Kasdim. Ur is a Sumerian word, and it was used later by the Akkadians and the Assyrians, possibly. And the Akkadians and the Assyrians, like Sumer and Akkad, because the Akkadians took over from the Assyrians and for a long time, from the Sumerians, and for a long time there was so much cultural borrowings that both of those civilizations, the Sumerians and the Akkadians, were known as Sumer and Akkad. So let's have a look at Sumer. Sumer is the first civilization that mankind established. This is a fascinating lecture. I gave a 5-hour lecture on this when I gave a live class, and we talked about the last ice age, the hunter-gatherer societies, and then how man discovered farming, and as a result of farming we had these flourishing civilizations, and why along that belt. I won't have time to do another 5-hour lecture, especially for a YouTube lecture. That's for a live class where we can bring in other subjects. But it's enough to know what I'm saying now, that Sumer was the cradle of civilization. When it came to writing, we can say that it was hair and hair between the Egyptians and the Sumerians. Some say the Sumerians beat them to it. Some say, latest evidence that maybe the Egyptians beat them to it. All of these civilizations started around about the same time. So we're talking about the ancient Egyptian, we're talking about the Indus Valley, we're talking about the Sumerians. Why they started, that's fascinating. That was part of the previous discussion. But we look at Sumer here because this is what concerns us. Ur is a city on this map. You can see it's very close to the Persian Gulf. And back then, the Persian Gulf, the waters were more inland than they are now, if I'm not mistaken. I think like a lack of water and everything, and it's the shorelines moved this way. So these cities, if you look at the most prominent cities here, cities like Nineveh, Ashur, Samarra, and Kish, Babylon, Nippur, Lapash, and Ur, and Uruk. Uruk is, we get the modern name Iraq, the country of Iraq. All of this is in the country of Iraq today. We get Iraq from here. But all of those cities I mentioned, they all sit next to rivers. All early cities, they have to be next to rivers. It's because the water is what you need to survive. So water for farming, water for life, fishing, and everything. All cities, major cities, are next to waterways. And the same thing, if you look at the Nile Delta and the River Nile, in a sea of desert, you can see a green area. And that's because, again, the Nile is very rich and fertile. It floods every year, and the flood water spread, and it brings silt down, and people can farm. And the same thing with the black lands of Iraq, considered the best soil in the world. So no doubt civilization sprung up here, and it's an arc. You can see it's a crescent. It's a crescent, and it's known as Mesopotamia, the fertile crescent, and it goes up from Iraq. It touches Anatolia, and then into Syria, and then down into Palestine, and then into Egypt, if you want to include that as well. That's the land of Mesopotamia, which the Greeks named it as that, with the land between the two rivers, and we know it as the Fertile Crescent. And the two famous rivers there are the Euphrates and the Tigris. Abraham, according to the Bible, was born in a city called Ur, and Ur is here. So we start from the beginning of Ur, because when was Abraham? This is a bit difficult to pin down, but we will look at the evidence, and then you know why I ended up showing the map starting from Sumer. So we can see Sumer and Akkad here. So bear that in mind. So the achievements of the Assyrians, the Sumerians, were what? This was the world's first civilization, and an extraordinary civilization. They invented writing. They developed cuneiform, however they pronounce it. I pronounce it cuneiform. This is clay tablets, and they had like a wedge-shaped stylus from reeds, and they would make marks. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. They invented writing, the world's first writing system. It wasn't because of religious practices, it was because of keeping accounts, because now you started to have city-states. When you have farming, you have a rise of civilization because you have specialization in specific tasks, and then each task, the blacksmith, the fishmonger, the weaver, the fixer of clothes, the maker of carpets, the maker of pots, the baker, all of these jobs are specialized, and then you progress. Father teaches son, teaches son, teaches son, and you have a craft that's highly specialized now, and it frees up everybody else to do other things. So the farmer no longer needs to bake his own bread or mend his own shoes because he goes to a cobbler and goes to a baker. That frees him up for farming. The baker doesn't need to go to the one who fixes his clothes because he will pay the khayyat, the tailor, to do it. That frees up the baker to fine-tune his craft, and then you get artisanal breads and everything like that. So writing was developed because of business. These city-states were trading with each other. Now they had trading goods. We had moved out of hunter-gathering society where we lived in very small groups. A fascinating subject. I really want to speak about it, but unfortunately don't have time. So we'll just move on from here. City-states, a city-state formation. They built some of the world's first organized city-states like Ur, Iraq, Eridu, each with its own government. They bought law and government, created early forms of law and administration, influenced later legal systems. We'll have a look at those as well. Agricultural innovations. They used irrigation systems to control the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, improving farming efficiency. Agriculture and cigarettes. They constructed large cigarette temples, demonstrating advanced engineering skills. Technological advancements. They invented the wheel. Before that, they used triangle wheels. Only joking. They invented the wheel. All of these inventions, today we're thinking, well, this is standard stuff, but it wasn't. This is the first time in human history these things were invented and used. What we take for granted today, they didn't have these. Just before this period, 6,000 years ago, where man settled down to a farming life. Before this, they were hunter-gatherers, walking around in skins and pieces of cloth, semi-naked, right? Foraging, and in very small societies. The population of the world was very small back then as opposed to now. Even in the medieval period, it was very small compared to what it is now. That's why when we have large-scale catastrophes such as plagues or wars, like for example the Mongol invasion, in an instant they can wipe out half of the world's population. So it's these things are very dangerous. What we take for granted today was something that the ancients took very seriously and understood in a very different way. So technological advancements such as inventing the wheel, used in carts and pottery, and developing bronze tools. So they went through the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age, and then they carried on like that. Mathematics and astronomy. They introduced the base 60. So we have 360 degrees in a circle. That was invented by them. The base 60 system was invented by them, and it's still used today. They tracked celestial movements. They were expert astronomers. And you're thinking, how is that possible without lens and everything? Well, you don't need those things. If you look up at the sky and you can see 100 million stars, which you would see if you didn't live in light pollution, very soon you start to see patterns. And very soon you see other phenomena. You can see the arc of the Milky Way. You can see the moon. Very quickly you realize the moon rise and set times, and once a month, and the seasons, how they change, and how the sun is in a different position every day, and how even solar cycles, the fascinating, which take thousands of years to repeat. They had observed the heavens for that long that they realized that patterns repeat themselves, which is a phenomenal achievement for people that had just literally taken their bearskins off, so to speak. Arts and culture excelled in sculpture, music, literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest literary works, along with the Book of the Dead, which is the Egyptian one. But this predates that by, probably a millennia or two. Trade networks established long-distance trade routes for resources like timber, metals, precious metals. So they traded with the Indus Valley civilization. They traded with the Sabaean civilization in the south. They traded with the northern civilizations and the Egyptians as well. The Sumerians and the Akkadians. We're still talking about them at the moment, especially the Sumerians. So this is what cuneiform looks like. It's a tablet. This tablet is from Iraq, and it's in the Penn Museum. It's 5,000 years old. So you're looking at something that was written 5,000 years ago. This is a form of writing, and those wedge shapes you can see are, we would call them letters today, but there's another name for them, a technical name for them. It's not a pictograph either. There's probably another name for them, these characters. And subhanallah, yani you are seeing the handiwork of a man from 5,000 years ago. And how much have we advanced as a society that we now have elegant quills and we can write beautiful calligraphy in many languages. And not only that, now we have computers that can write, and now we even have AI that does it all for us. So you're looking back into history here, and you're looking at your forefathers. This is how they started off. Before this, there was nothing. This is the earliest form of writing. This is the code of Ur-Nammu. This is the oldest legal code we have in existence. And the Sumerian king Ur-Nammu, he's seated here, and he was the creator of this code. He bestows his governorship on Hashamir, NC of Iskun-Sin. This is a cylinder seal. This is 4,000 years old, this cylinder seal. If you look at the picture, you can see the king seated, and he is the same size as the people who are standing. So their kings were visually, they would draw them bigger. So if the king stands, he's about like a foot or two taller than them. He's a third larger than them. There is the moon there, which is the god Sin. And if you look carefully at their clothes, right, in both drawings, on left and right, look carefully at their clothes, and these are the clothings that they wore, and these are the clothings that Ibrahim alayhi salam would have been familiar with. Look at the writing again, and then on your extreme right you can see the world's first legal code in print. There may have been legal codes before this, but we don't have them. See, I use the word that we understand: pen and paper, book, parchment, print. Really, I should say carved in stone, or etched in baked clay, etched in clay that was then baked, soft clay that was baked. This is the world's first legal code. Agriculture, we said that they were the first ones to do agriculture. If you look in the hand of this particular farmer, he's got a bushel of wheat. It was wheat. Wheat is, the most fundamental thing that humans eat, and that is farmed. And it's because of the farming of wheat that we had the advent of civilization. So they would show that in the clay tablets and in their artwork. So this is a Sumerian cylinder seal. So they're actually seals, right? So they're made round. So when you open them up, this is the image you get. So this is a cylinder seal impression, which has been opened up, dating to, that's 5,200 years old. That's 3,200 BC, showing an NC and his occulate feeding a sacred herd. Ninartu was an agricultural deity, and in a poem known as the Sumerian Georgica, he offered detailed advice on farming. So you can download this poem and see the advice that they gave each other on farming back then. Look at the clothing. The guy on the left is wearing a tunic or a loincloth, and the one on the right, he's wearing a tunic to the bottom. So they're both topless, which is in accordance with the cultures of those areas, those times. And the tunic actually looks like it's see-through. So it's a very fine material, or it's done like that to show that it's a very fine material. And you can see their hairstyles. You can see they have sharp noses. Now, these are the Sumerians. Now, the Sumerians, by the way, their language is a language isolate. So we don't know anything of where they originated from. The Sumerians call themselves the black-headed ones. So their language tells us that they are genetically different from the Semitic people, who are the Akkadians, the Assyrians, and then the Arabs and the Israelites and the Palestinians and the Canaanites and all these other people that the people of the Levant. These are all Semitic people. And out of these Semitic people, the Arabs are the only ones that are Arab actually. Every other people that we've just mentioned are not technically Arabs. But the Sumerians didn't belong to that family. These were the earliest people there, and we think we've in the DNA of the marsh Arabs. If you YouTube the marsh Arabs that live amongst the marshes in the southern Iraq, they are looked down upon from the regular Arabs, and their culture is very different. And in the DNA of the marsh Arabs, we have the DNA of the Sumerians. So for 6,000 years, they kind of stayed in the same area. And if you look at the housing of the marsh Arabs, they use reed. They make beautiful reed huts and grand halls like a majlis. And you can see on cylinder seals from 4,000 years ago, the same architecture, subhanallah. So those people are the closest that we have to the Sumerians today. Apart from that, we don't know anything about the Sumerians. Now, ziggurats, it's zikaratum. I don't know the actual pronunciation of this. I always try to get the original pronunciations for words. Sometimes I can't. We know it as a ziggurat. Now, the Anu ziggurat and the White Temple, this is in Iraq, today's Iraq. And Iraq was a city-state at that time. The original pyramidal structure, the Anu ziggurat, dates to the Sumerians. This is 4000 BC. So 6,000 years ago is the original structure. And the White Temple was built on top of that 3,500 BC. So 500 years after it was originally constructed. So you're looking at something here that looks like a pyramid, but that was constructed much before the pyramids. And a question arises, why does it look like a pyramid? The reason why it looks like a pyramid, I'll answer before I show you a few more examples. So this is the plan when they, in 1898, when they dug parts of it out of the ground, and this is the drawings that they drew of it. So you've got a terrace, you've got a ramp, you've got the White Temple platform, and on the left, this is what it looks like. And you can see that the sand's covering the sides, just like when they found some of the pyramids, the smaller ones. They found the Sphinx. The Sphinx was covered up to its head because people had neglected these things. These things had been neglected. It was only the British and the certain European countries like the French, especially the Germans and especially the British, that went and started discovering these things again. And the Bible had mentioned these civilizations, but they didn't believe that the Bible was talking the truth until they discovered these magnificent civilizations. And all of a sudden they were like, oh my God, so the Bible had been mentioning events that were actually true. So what else in the Bible can we look at and correlate? Today, even though they still see the Bible as mainly a work of fiction, and we're not going to go down the theological route and start to say, oh, well, there are stories in the Bible that are in line with the Quran. That's a theological debate. But as a historical source, they still look upon it as a weak source, and it's, for the most part, it's unreliable. But when you have stories that the Bible talks about that you find evidence of, right, then you have to start looking at other names and other stories in the Bible and start to think, if the names were slightly changed, because obviously the Bible it's going like many millennia later, these stories were written down, names change, and then if we could just get the root names and then search in history, in records, in these preserved clay tablets, and join names up and get ideas of names of these cities and places, and see what's written in the Bible, and does it correlate exactly with what we're seeing in real life. There may be still things, there probably are names, of course there are names and things mentioned in the Bible today which we don't know what they're referring to. It's possibly cities and stuff like this still buried under the sand. So it's Zakarum, to protrude, to build high. So a ziggurat is the earliest kind of a building that man could build, right? So a classic example would be in Genesis when we have the Tower of Babel. Very famous. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. And this is when they tried to do this, and then God saw, they tried to challenge God, and then God saw it as a challenge, and then God scattered them through the earth. Before they spoke, according to the Bible, before they spoke one tongue, and then God changed their tongue so that each of them would be an enemy to each other, not understand each other. This is the biblical account. But what this is referring to as like a tower or a ziggurat. This is an exaggerated image of one, but I'm sure you get the idea. This is one, the Elamite one in Iraq. So the reason I said that we rule out the Elamites is because the Elamites are not Semitic people. They're proto-Iranian type people. I use this word very loosely, Iranian, but we're talking about people in an area where the later Iranians came, and ethnically they were probably more closely related to those people than they were to the Semites. The Elamite culture had their own gods. The culture was similar because obviously you're as much as part of your environment as you are part of your nurture. So nature versus nurture. So these civilizations all look very similar. This is a ziggurat in Dur Untash. They call it in Persia. They call it Choka Zanbil. This is in Khuzestan in Iran. So this is 1300 BC. And it covers a very large area. Again, it looks like a pyramid. It looks like Zeus's pyramid. This is what it looks like today. This is a reconstructed one in Iraq, and it has a central platform. It has stairs going from the left and right, and a central stairway going up. Now, what they did up there, one can only imagine that it was some sort of worship. Like you worship in like a temple or in a high place. No king would be living up there. The kings back then, they would either have living quarters that were very similar to everybody else, or especially with the Sumerians in the later period, and then the Assyrians and the Akkadians, grand palaces. This design is so ancient, we know now, we can see it's 5,000-year-old design. Even today in Iraq, they use this design. So this is the great mosque in Samarra, the spiral Milawi minaret of the 9th century. Al-Jammi Mosque in Samarra, northwest of Baghdad, is emblematic of Iraq. The Mongols destroyed the mosque in 1278 but left the minaret standing. The mosque was commissioned in 848 and completed in 851 by the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mutawakkil, who resided in Samarra. At this time, the capital was Baghdad, but then there was a revolt and there were problems, and then they moved their capital to Samarra for a while. And this was the world's largest mosque during its construction at that time. And you can see this. This is a famous image. You've probably seen pictures of it and how it spirals up. This is another picture of it from probably the last century. And there's an old town you can see, a walled town. So this is a mosque, which you can see. And then you can see a walled town behind it. All towns were like this. And then there's a central mosque in the middle of that town. This design of a walled town is the design of every town before modern cities emerged. You can see pictures of old Jeddah from the air. There's one picture I've seen where even Jeddah was walled. All cities, London, you can see the walls of London. All cities, like in Lahore, you say Old Lahore. And you can see Old Lahore is different from New Lahore. It's very small streets, and there's a wall there. All cities were walled, and if we go back to the time of the Sumerians, these cities were city-states. So you had one ruler, another ruler, and then this ruler overcame that ruler and expanded his domain ever so slightly. And then there was another city along the route, and like that. So it wasn't a case of, like empires covering half of the world like the Mongols or the Romans or the Persians. No, it was small city-states. And those cities were very small population-wise. We call it a city today. Their population was the same as our small towns today. So I did say that they look like pyramids. Why? We'll have a look at now. This pyramid on the right side is the pyramid of Zosa in Egypt. And you're thinking, but aren't Egyptian pyramids like this? Yeah, well, yes, they are. This is an early type of a pyramid. In the beginning, the pyramids were like this. This is known as a step pyramid. I've seen it in real life. It's good to visit this one because it shows you how they they learnt their craft slowly but surely, and there's nobody around, nobody visits this. Most people don't even know this exists. On the left hand side, that's a pyramid. The style is emblematic. It's from South Central America, so it could be in Mexico, it could be Mayan, it could be the Incan, it could be any of those kind of pyramids. The style is the same. Halfway across the world, and this is where people start to develop conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories aside, this is a firmly grounded lecture in archaeology and history. Conspiracy theories aside, what would be the possible reason why we have pyramids halfway across the world from different timelines that look the same? And yet we claim that these civilizations never came into contact with each other. No, it wasn't alien, it wasn't ET that came and spread the knowledge and we learned our skills from aliens who happened to come down. No, the answer is really simple, but before I give the answer, I'll show you another pyramid. This is from the medieval period, or probably even later. It's the Kaʿbah temple in Cambodia, I think this is. If you look in Southeast Asia, Angkor Wat and everything, you'll see the structures are pyramidical there as well. Just look at an Indian temple. It kind of has that rising. Why would it be that every peoples on earth would construct buildings like this? That's because this is the only way they knew how to make buildings large and then not collapse on themselves. Because to make a large building, the only way for them, they didn't have prefab or steel or aluminium or those rods that they have, or concrete. These stone buildings had a massive weight, far exceeding the weight of buildings today. And if you had it thin like that, it would just collapse in on itself. So they had to make it like this, and then like that, so it can take the weight. If you look at the construction of the pyramid from inside, you'll see that it's got the weight bearing levels inside it. You can actually go into those tiny rooms, and the whole weight is like from here, it's like layered spaces, and then like what do you call it, 2 stones here, and it's the whole massive superstructure weight is being taken off the sides. And these buildings will far outlive any modern building today. No modern building will stand 500-600 years. All these skyscrapers you see would be completely reduced to rubble if man didn't intervene and repair them and take care of them. They're not built to last, but this is natural stone they're working with. So this is built to last. So it's because of like I said, all civilizations take off either at the same time or in their own timelines. And even without contact, they're going to go through the same experiences. Why? Because they're working with the same materials. So one civilization may take a few hundred years later to get there, but independently they will get to the same place as the earlier civilization. This is the reason why you see pyramids and similar building styles all over the world. If you look at what would we call them? If you look at churches in England or in Europe, you'll see that outside the church you'll have some kind of like a ribs even, and they built that to hold the structure in place. Because back then the name evades me of what that name is. It's like the hold of a ship turned the other way around. Like the skeleton of a ship. When you're building a ship, you'll have like the main beam, and then they'll put something here and something here and something here, and there's a gap, and it looks like a skeleton, right? The ship's like rotting, and it's just a skeleton kind of when a ship breaks down. The reverse of that would be those things on the ridges on the churches, and that was the architectural style. That's the only way they could keep that structure in place. This is the reason why when we have the world's largest freestanding arch in Ctesiphon in Iraq from the Persians, and then we have the largest freestanding domes. For example, if you look at the churches, the early churches in Constantinople, marvels of engineering, how they would do that. St. Paul's Cathedral in London. In earlier times, they couldn't do that. So they'd have to work out different ways of construction, which would give unique looks. And you trace those engineering looks, and then you can garner timelines and work out, okay, so this is the evolutionary leap of man through his construction, through his pottery, through his farming technology, through his clothing technology. And it's a fascinating subject, and it all ties in with the earlier civilization, the Sumerians. If you really want to see this trajectory, you start with the Sumerians and the Egyptians, and then the Indus Valley civilization. But we know far more about the Sumerians than we do about the Indus Valley civilization. In fact, more attention is being given to the Sumerians than arguably the civilization on the Yangtze River or the Yellow River, and then or the Indus Valley civilization. They were advanced in mathematics. This is a mathematic table. It looks like some kind of abacus if you look at it carefully. And then this is a school of mathematics in Nippur. This picture was taken in 1899. This was a scribal training center. So in the medieval era, how many people could read and write? Even the kings couldn't read and write. Very rare, right? You know, like if from a high civilization like the Arab Islamic civilization or the Chinese or something like that, yes, you'd have kings and princes being able to read and write. But if other, like for example, when Europe was in the Dark Ages, Charlemagne couldn't read or write. Many of the French kings in the early period couldn't read and write. So here we had a scribal school dedicated to reading and writing, mathematics, back then, 4,000 years ago. Where were your ancestors 4,000 years ago? What plant was your granddad reading up 4,000 years ago when that granddad over there was learning to write on a clay tablet and do mathematics like this on an abacus? I call it abacus, by the way. So Sumer and Akkad. So this is, now you can see Sumer and Akkad together, right? This was their extent. So the Fertile Crescent, so just imagine one half of the crescent, and it's following the river. Its dominance ended around 2334 BC when Sargon of Akkad conquered the Sumerian cities and established the Akkadian Empire. This is the first entry now of Semitic people. The Akkadian cylinder seal from sometime around 2300 BC or thereabouts, depicting the deities Inanna, Utu, Enki and Isumut. These are the four deities, and look at them carefully. One is holding something in his hand. The other one, I forgot the symbolism of these things, but I do remember the fish. You can see the river and the fish. So primitive deities were all concerned about what they saw in creation. So farming, fishing, storm gods and this and things like that. And the god on the right hand side, he has two faces, a bit like Janus in the Romans, who the god of two faces. These are images of their gods. So Inanna resting her foot on the back of a lion while Ninshabur stands in front of her paying obeisance. Look at the clothing of both people and look how they depicted the god. Something akin to horns, carrying some kind of royal scepters or weapons with wings. This Favahar, I think it's called. This symbol is a very early symbol of a symbol that would carry on for thousands of years. Even today, the Persians, they still have that symbol, right? And the Aura Mazda was represented on that symbol as well. The Akkadians, I'm sure, here you can see a sample of it, right? The wings behind him. So the religions, what were the religions of these people of the Fertile Crescent? So we had the Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Amorites. These came successively one after the other. The Amorite came for a while and then the Babylonians came. It eventually ended in the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were taken over by the Persians, Cyrus the Great, and then taken over by the Greeks, and then taken over by the Romans. Then the Persians again, the Parthians, and then then there was the Muslim conquest, and then it was the Ottomans, and then the British were there, and then they made Iraq. On the other side, it was Syria, a similar story. So the gods of these people, they shared gods because the first empire on earth, the Sumerians, had a well-developed pantheon, and then the other civilizations just adopted and took and either included or just changed the names or even kept the names the same. So let's have a look. So we had An in Sumerian, known as Anu in Akkadian. Assyrian, I didn't get a name. Babylonians knew it as Anu. Amorites, Anu. and then sky god, father of the gods. Enlil and Enki, two names that keep coming up again and again in the pantheon. Right, across the board it was called Enlil, god of air, kingship, divine command, and then Enki. Later it was called which is interesting because I always thought Enki, that name carried forward. God of, didn't get that one. Inanna, another famous name. Ishtar, known Inanna for the Sumerians and then Ishtar for everybody else. Nana for the Sumerians and Sin for everybody else. So Ishtar was the god of the star, Venus, and Sin, the god of the moon, and then Uta, which is known as Shamas, god of the sun, justice, or whatever else they assigned duties. Man assigns duties for God. Shamas we know as Shamsun today, right? Shamsun, it's a negative, it's a feminine verb. Shamsun, even though it ends in the nonation, it's actually feminine. And then we have Damuzi. Now the exact pronunciation I really wish I could get. Damuzid for the Sumerians, and it was adopted by the Semitic people and became Tammuz, true sun. Now the Hebrew and the Arab, in the Hebrew calendar and the Arab calendar, they still have this as a month, and I think it's the month of July. So this is something going back 6,000 years, and the Arabs still have this name in their calendar today, Tammuz. So we've seen the ziggurat, we've seen the reed rush houses, and now we're seeing a month taken forward. 6,000 years and still in use. So why did I mention this? It's because Abraham could technically have fitted in anywhere. We don't know the exact timeline of Abraham. We can take educated guesses based on evidences which we shall look at, but it's good to know, as part of the deeper Sīrah course, the milieu and the cultural surroundings of Ibrāhīm alayhi salam. Have you ever thought about that? Did you ever think about the utensils Ibrāhīm alayhi salam would have seen and used, the clothing he would have worn, the buildings he would have seen, the gods' names he would have known? So we're going to build upon that. Let's do it gradually. So Abraham's timeline. Traditionally, the Bible dates him as 2000 to 1800 BC. The modern estimate is not much different. 100 years here or there. 1900 to 1700 BC. We won't open a can of worms and go into new chronology. If you're interested in new chronology and old chronology, internet is there for you. The Sumerian influence was on the wane, and the Amorites had come to dominate Mesopotamia. So for a while, a group known as the Amorites. Now this group is not as famous and well known as the Akkadians or the Assyrians, but for people in the know who know, they know. The Amorites were a very powerful group that came in, nomadic group that came. It's always a case of nomads conquering civilized peoples, barbarians moving into civilized lands, because the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots look upon the river to the rich fat people with the haves, and the rich fat people with the haves do nothing to protect themselves because they become complacent and fat, and then the have-nots, the desperate people, they come in. And this is the Khaldunian model. You can read Ibn Khaldun and he mentions this, and everybody who observes history will be able to tell you this. And this is what happened with the Mongols, the barbarians, the in the north, the Scythians, the Avars, the Alans, the Goths, the Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Jutes, all of them, the Vandals, the Huns, the Turks, the Mongols. They live in an area of the world, a temperate area of the world, whereas all the civilizations would live one or two latitudes down, right, in a specific latitude, and then they were the have-nots and these were the haves, the centers of civilization, all the way up to China, right? So from Rome all the way to China, spanning the whole entire known world. And then the have-nots were the barbarians above, and then they would invade down. Now the barbarians would, this is a bad word to use, it's not really nice to use that word anymore, but this is what old civilizations would call them. They would trade stuff with the settled city people that they needed, and then the trade would swing both ways. The city people would need stuff of them, horses, fur, skins, cheese. stuff like that. And then they would take weapons and, leather. Actually, leather would come from the barbarians, and then stuff like that. The same thing with the Arabs, right? The Bedouins and the settled Arabs of the cities. We discussed this in previous lectures. So the location was Ur Kasdim. So this is Ur of the Chaldees, Kasdim in its original language. This is what the Bible says, and this is the reason why we think Ibrahim alayhi salam was from this area. Most scholars identify this with Ur in southern Mesopotamia near modern day Nasiriyah in Iraq. We saw this on the map. Kasdim, as Chaldeans. When you hear Europeans say this, anybody who knows his Bible history, they will say Ur of the Chaldees, Ur of the Chaldees. Kasdim is the name that the people speaking Hebrew or Aramaic or Arabic, that's how they know it. Sorry, I need to keep getting up because my camera only records for 24 minutes. So I have a timer set and it goes off, and then I need to get up and reset the camera. Thank God I've got a microphone here, otherwise I'd have to reset the microphone, reset the phone, and so it's an arduous process. Making one video is an arduous process. And then you've got to sync everything with you've got to have a screen record going on at the same time, and then you've got to sync it all together, and it's actually quite long. May Allah make it easy. So Ur al-Kaldinin, Kaldinin they would call it. This name is taken obviously straight from the Jewish Bible. The Arabs don't know anything about this city. They didn't know anything about this because this is thousands of years before them, right? But obviously it's mentioned in the Jewish Bible. So Kasdim is anachronistic actually. We know this now. The Chaldeans didn't arrive in southern Mesopotamia until around 10,000 BCE. So this is now where we're going to delve into the factual evidence we can gauge by looking at many things in the area, linguistically, archaeologically, culturally, looking at Bible narratives, marrying them with archaeological evidence, linguistic evidence, and trying to understand who Ibrahim alayhi salam was, where he came from, who his people were, and what his timeline was. And it's a fascinating discovery. Let's do this together. So this idea of Ur Kasdim, all of a sudden we know now that it's not correct. So let's take this out of our heads. He's not from Ur Kasdim. But was he from Ur? Let's take a look. What civilization was it? What was his civilization? Ur originally was a Sumerian city-state. It was a major center of Sumerian culture. By Abraham's time, which is 1900 BCE, Sumerian dominance had faded. The region was then a part of a larger Amorite-dominated empire, particularly under rulers like Hammurabi of Babylon, the famed Hammurabi who wrote one of the very earliest legal codes. The Code of Hammurabi is even more famous than Urnana's code. And you can see this, I think it's in the Louvre Museum in Paris. You can read these law codes. You can actually go online and say what were the law, and they're quite savage, they're quite harsh, for small infractions, death. And they say it's one of the earliest legal codes. Hammurabi of Babylon, who was actually an Amorite, not a Akkadian, not a Sumerian, not a Babylonian. Culturally, they were still influenced. As I told you, the overwhelming culture was Sumerian. Why? It's like, imagine today, with each of these barbarians, with each of these simpler civilizations from the north that would invade, like for example the Mongols or the Turks, very quickly they become assimilated into the greater civilization. So we have the Persians. Very quickly the barbarians, the Turks of the north, and the Mongolians became Persianate, and the civilization became Islamicate. When the Yuan dynasty in China, which was a Mongol dynasty run by Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, was Chinese in its culture. When the Mongols, the Turks, went to India, after a few centuries, they looked like Indians. The same thing. Why? Because the more advanced the civilization is, the more you adopt it, because it's overwhelming in its presence. What can you offer that civilization? Nothing. They're hardly going to drop their rich civilization and follow your simple civilization. No, you are going to follow theirs, right? So you can still see the Sumerian influence and the Sumerian world at this time, even at this late date. So culturally still influenced by Sumerian traditions and religion. Politically likely ruled by the Amorite kings. Okay, so we're getting a bit warm. Amorite kings or city-state governors under Amu. This is the word Amorite comes from. We'll have a look more at that later. So the Kasdim, Kadniyun, I think there may be a spelling mistake there. Kadniyun there. So the Kasdim, the Bible and some Islamic sources mention Kasdim. The Islamic sources wholesale took it from the Bible, right? So that's why we mention it. Ibn Kathir took this from the Jewish stories. So we have to now go back to the Jewish stories and say, why did they say this? Historically, the Chaldeans, the Kasdim, were a group of Semitic tribes who did not arrive in southern Mesopotamia until around 10,000 BCE. So 1,000 years after the time of Ibrāhīm alayhi salam, according to the Bible. And according to today's method of dating also, 1,000 years up to 700 years to 900 years after the timeline of Abraham. That's a very long time. So we no longer believe that he was from Ur Kasdim. But was he from Ur? The city had obviously existed there since Sumerian times. The ancient city of Ur was excavated in the 1920s and 1930s by Sir Linory Woolley. He discovered temples, ziggurats, royal tombs, cuneiform tablets, and a highly advanced Sumerian city. The site is near Nasiriyah in Iraq. It matched the traditional location of Ur of the Chaldees. So this is the only reason why they said, aha, bingo, we found the city of Abraham. It sounds much better to say we've discovered Abraham's city than to just say we've just discovered another monumental city. Every city that was discovered there was something like stupendous. It's like that moment was like, like the best moment an archaeologist can have. In fact, for the whole world, because it gives us an insight into early man. We learn so much by looking at our past. But then to put the icing on the cake and say, aha, this is the place of Abraham, that has an even more greater significance than the actual discovery of the city itself. Right? So this is why we had this story. Thousands of Sumerian and Akkadian clay tablets from Ur have been translated. You can find those translations online, and if you read the linguistic records, and it gives you an idea of how life was. They show Ur as a major Sumerian religious center, especially dedicated to the moon god Nana Sin. But they do not mention the Chaldeans during the early Bronze Age, Abraham's time. So nothing has been mentioned of this name, because this city predated Ur Kasdim. Chaldeans appear in the historical record around 1000 BCE, mostly in Assyrian texts, so no longer in Akkadian or Sumerian. It's Assyrian, it's the third civilization now. There's a clear historical gap of several centuries, 900 years, 700 to 900 years, between Abraham's time and the arrival of the Chaldeans. So now let's have a look at the linguistic and textual evidence. The Bible and some Islamic sources mention Kandinin, Kasdim, but historically this is a repeat of the same thing actually. So, this is a repeat of the same thing. Some of my slides double up, by the way. You'll see that. I'll just bypass them. So why does this matter? It suggests the name Chaldeans, Kasdim, may have been added later to clarify which Ur it meant. Now, we can safely assume that the Jewish people or the writers of the Bible knew about Kasdim. So they just added both names together and said Ur Kasdim. So he was from Ur of the Kasdim. They didn't realize that he was actually 1,000 years earlier and it wasn't Kasdim. So this is how this mistake happened. So now it's deeper Seerah. We're aiming to think like historians here and to probe deeper. And to think like a historian is to join the dots. It's like Sherlock Holmes. When he has clues and then you join the clues and you try to make a cohesive picture. And Sherlock Holmes says something very interesting. He says, when you've eliminated the obvious, everything that's possible, when you've eliminated that, the only thing that's left that's impossible has to be the truth. And this is how we look at these things also. So the archaeological excavations, the ancient city of Ur, as we know, was excavated in the 20s and 30s. We have the pictures, and you can read up on Sir Leonard Woolley. He discovered all of these things. This is a repeat of another slide. And this also is a repeat. So the dating of the Chaldeans appear in the historical record around 1000 BCE, mostly in Assyrian texts. Remember this, by around 600 BCE, they ruled Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, another famous name in the Bible and in your archaeological historical studies, if you're inclined that way, like myself. There's a clear gap of several centuries. Sorry for the repeating. So the phrase Ur means city in Sumerian. So if we look at like Iraq, all of these, they had Ur at the start. Jerusalem, the J wasn't in the original language. That's why Jesus is not Jesus. Jehovah is not Jehovah, it's Yahweh, and Yesu and Isu and Isa in Arabic. And Jerusalem, if you take away the J, you're left with Ur. Jerusalem. Ur, salam, salam. Ur, salam, city of peace. Shalom, salam, city of peace. Like we have Bethlehem, Beit Lahm. Beit, house in Arabic and Hebrew. Lahm is meat, right? That's my translation of it, and I'm pretty sure that's what it translates as. So linguistic and the textual studies, Ur came from the Hebrew Bible in Genesis 11:28. Chapter 11 verse 28 and chapter 11 verse 31. Scholars believe it may have been a later editorial addition used to identify the location of Ur more precisely for readers who lived long after Abraham. Right? And the Islamic and Jewish traditions preserve the name Kasdim. Abraham's era, then, if we look at the dating of Abraham that we know, matches the time when the Amorites had moved into the area. Who were the Amorites? They were not Assyrians, they were not Akkadians, but they were related people that were nomads that lived in the area around the Levant. So that would be Syria today and southern Turkey, Anatolia. In that region, they moved down from there. They had two paths. They could have went this side of the Fertile Crescent or this side. They went this side, down towards Iraq. Hammurabi, by the way, the famous king I mentioned, was an Amorite king. Many city-states had Amorite rulers, and this aligns with Abraham's migration through Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Egypt. Remember this migration now, we will look at that more as well. Why the name Kasdim then? Where did this name come from? Terah took his son, in the Bible it explicitly says Terah took his son Abram. That was the original name. It changed to Abraham later on. Abram, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldees, or Kasdim, to go into the land of Canaan. So the Bible charts this story. Muslims have picked it up about this migration, and there is something in the Quran and the Bible that says that God had told him to leave, and he did leave. Where was he originally when God told him to leave? The Quran doesn't mention, but the Bible says Ur, and then it adds Kasdim. This became the foundational story for the Jews, Muslims, and Christians afterwards. The Quran has one or two nuances to it. The Bible has its own version, and the Christians and the Jews take the stories together. And we will look at the Quranic text and the Bible text together. So this particular site that he discovered was wealthy and deeply religious. People in the past were very, very religious as opposed to now. Atheism is a new phenomenon. And it matches the kind of polytheistic environment Abraham is said to have rejected. So basically, because everything that this archaeologist and these archaeologists saw matched the biblical stories, it was aha, this is it, we've got it. But it doesn't work like that, we know now. So once, everything matched this biblical story, and they just said, this is it. This is, it became the dominant academic religious view about the birth of Abraham. Muslim and Jewish scholars, the Muslim scholars adopted it. Ibrāhīm is what Muslims know. This is the rendition that Muslims know the name by. And with a journey from a place of idol worship which matches Ur's religious significance. Ur was the most impressive Ur. I told you there are many Urs, and this seems to be the most impressive out of all of them, so that's why they were going to say this is the main one. There were multiple cities in the ancient world called Ur, and the Sumerian Ur was the most developed and significant. So this made the most sense for them. So this is the story of Ur Kasdim. So let's get this story out of our heads now. Where is the location? Was it even Ur? We don't know. But let's go with it. It could have been Ur. The Bible says Ur. It may have been Ur. It may not have been Ur. It's not important. The most important clue comes from when you start to chart the travel, because the Quran mentions him leaving. The Bible mentions him leaving. So where did he leave from and where did he end up? So when you start looking at that and backtracking, then you can get a location. The city of Ur. So what's not anachronistic is the city of Ur is a real location. It existed long before Abraham. So that city had been inhabited for thousands of years before. Thousands is a bit too long, probably a couple of thousand max. It was originally a Sumerian city, later taken over by the Akkadians and then taken over by the Amorites. So Ur, Abraham could have definitely been from Ur. That makes him what? Either a Sumerian, an Akkadian, Assyrian, or Amorite. Now, if we look at his time frame, which empire or civilization was dominant in that area? Before we look at that, let's look at some more evidence. Let's have a look at the Bible chronology, because we need to ascertain some things from the Bible and archaeology, which is what I said I would do. So historians work backwards. Now, this is where I have a problem. Historians work backwards from fixed dates in the Bible. So the first question one needs to ask is that we, i.e. the archaeological community, the historical community, don't use the Bible for any sort of historical dating. So how are they now using the Bible to date prophets, and especially Abraham? Well, the honest answer they give you is that we know that the Bible cannot be relied upon for dating systems, but this is the only thing we have. So we go with it, see how much we can work with, see what we can back up with archaeology, and then if it fits, go with it. If not, find another narrative. So let's go with the biblical for the time being. So the Exodus is when the Jews were taken out of bondage by Moses from the Egyptians, is dated by conservative scholars to be around 1300 to 1250 BCE. So 1300 BCE, that's 3,300 years ago. I'm actually maths dyslexic, I hope that's right. According to the Bible, the Israelites were in Egypt for about 400 years. I challenge this. 400 years is a hell of a long time to be in another country as slaves. Probably there for a much less time than this. They ended up there. Periodic droughts. So we all know the story of Joseph. The 7 lean years, for the 7 fat years, followed by the 7 lean years. That drought, where is the land of Canaan? It's above. It's in Gaza. It's where Gaza is today, right? You know, you have the Rafah crossing. That's a very ancient name as well, by the way. Rafah means head, right? And if you look at it, there was the top point of where Egypt separated from Canaan, and the famine permeated the hinterland, right up into Canaan and the Levant. So these people had no choice but to go to rich, fat Egypt, which Yusuf alayhi salam had the dream, informed the king, and then they planned for this drought, famine. And so the Jews and the Canaanites and all the people who were in that area at that time moved up, down. It depends how you look at the world map. In some world maps, the world is this way. So they moved up. That's why I called it Ras, the head. But today's world map, it's this way. So then they would move down into Egypt. So they moved down into Egypt, and they were taken as captives by the king and enslaved for 400 years. I don't think it was 400 years, but certainly they moved down and they were taken captive. It took for it took for Moses to be born in the royal household, to be nurtured in a royal household, to then be able to become powerful enough to take them out of bondage. This is why Moses is the most celebrated prophet for the Jews, and he's the most mentioned in the Quran as well. He took them out of bondage and led them into the land of Israel. And I don't think Moses actually made it. He died en route. He couldn't enter the promised land at that time, right? So this would put Jacob and Joseph, right, grandson and great-grandson of Abraham, right? So you should know your chronology here, in Egypt around 1700 BCE. So these are rough dates now we're working with. Let's just go with these dates. Abraham would then have lived around, because he's the great-grandfather, he would have lived around 1900 or 1800 BCE. This is where we get this date from. So Abraham must have lived many centuries before the Chaldeans, by 700 years to 1,000 years. This is why we say, why am I repeating the same thing again? Why historians don't fully accept the traditional story? Because there's no archaeological evidence. There's no proof that Abraham existed. Why am I thinking Jesus? Is because they'll say the same thing about Jesus. There's no archaeological proof that a man called Jesus existed. They will go so far as saying, out of spite, that a man called Muhammad didn't exist. I mean, he came in the full light of history. You know, it's not like he came in the ancient world. He came at the end of antiquity into the early medieval period. Right, so he came in the full light of day, we can say, and he existed. But we have no proof for Jesus, and we have no proof for Moses. We have no proof for Abraham. We believe in them from a theocratic point of view. We believe in these peoples, prophets. But from an archaeological evidence, there's no proof that a man called Abraham lived. We only have the Bible to go by. So going by there are no inscriptions, no monuments or tablets, nothing informing us. So just going by the Bible, we cannot say that this disproves him. A lack of proof is not proof of something not existing. It's mentioned in one source, let's go with that source. The patriarchal sources are ancient oral sources. So they were written down centuries later. You know, traditional societies, it's like storytelling. That's how they know. It's like the Aborigines, for tens of thousands of years, stories being passed down, not written down. And when I say tens of thousands of years, that's correct, by the way, because the Aborigines have been living there for 75,000 years, an isolated gene pool for 75,000 years, completely isolated from the rest of mankind. No interaction, nothing, living there. It's actually kind of sad as well. So phrases, so then we start looking at phrases, you know, like reflect the language and geography, or we know this, okay, language, geography, Chaldees, Kastim, okay, when did they arrive? We get close to dates, right? So historians think some details reflect the time when the stories were recorded around 1500 BCE, not necessarily the time of Abraham lived. Some customs in the Abraham stories, like marriage contracts or slave inheritance, do fit with the early 2nd century millennium. Right, so then you're thinking, aha, this is getting warm in this particular date, right? So let's rubbish the Kastim story, but we have in centuries preceding certain marriage contracts, certain slave agreements that match with stories in the Bible, a specific culture. Let's go with that. We're getting closer. We're getting warmer. But other details, like the mention of the Philistine and camels, is problematic. Right, that's a later period, because at that time we are not even sure if the camel was domesticated. The camel was domesticated around the time of Ibrāhīm alayhi salam or just afterwards, right? And when you're talking about camel journeys, it's highly possible that Abraham did his journey on foot or on a mule or something like that, because the camel had not been domesticated at that time. So they're anachronistic again. They're problematic. So we take that out, because even though that's mentioned in the Bible, if that story is around 100 years, give or take, of the time we think of the domestication of the camel, then yes, it's possible that we are wrong and the Bible is telling us a fact that we're not aware of by 100 years, give or take. But if it's like 500 or 1,000 years, we can safely say that the archaeological record and the records we have in stone and, you know, bone findings of camels around villages and homesteads and campsites and stuff like that tell you that yes, camels were living in close proximity to human beings. If there's a gap of 500 years, then we could say, well, we go with the archaeology, and then the Bible story, you know, like as of now, we cannot believe in that story unless further proof is furnished. However, from a theological point of view, we're still hesitant and careful about certain biblical stories. Certain stories, they could be like religious-based stories, and then we have to hold our tongue and say, well, we know there are truthful stories in the Bible, and then there are stories that are not true, and we don't know, so we hold back. But certain archaeological stories, I don't know what the theological implications would be of saying, well, the archaeological evidence here doesn't match, and then the Bible says something else. Can we say, well, we go by the archaeological evidence for a lack of further proof of a biblical story? Something for me to look into as well. So the story of Abraham was passed down orally for many centuries before being written down. Historians think some details reflect the time when the stories were recorded. So this is again the date 1000 BCE, not necessarily the time when Abraham lived. So phrases like Ul Shawdi's scholars see a mix of early and late cultural elements in the story. So you have to separate the chaff from the wheat. So you see anachronistic stories, you see stories that match timelines, and then all of a sudden you get a spanner in the works. You take that spanner out and you disregard that story, like the Campbell or certain other things. But we go with stories, right? Certain stories like the marriage stories and the slave rights. And so let's dig further. Most historians do not accept the biblical timeline literally, like the Israelites being in Egypt for 430 years, Exodus with 600,000 men. So a slave colony who were abused for 400 years managed to somehow procreate and produce 500,000 people. Today, there's about 7 million or less Jews in Israel. Right? Jordanian, Bedouin, Arabs are probably 3 million, and then the rest 4 million are Palestinians that came from Palestine. Right? And this is in the 21st century. So you're talking about 600,000 men. That's like a whole empire back then of Jews leaving with Moses. So that story, it just doesn't seem, it's impossible actually. And 430 years, that's problematic as well. So the patriarchal narratives of Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, historians see them as mythologized tribal memories, not biographies with datable evidence. But let's hold those stories there and see if anything matches what we need here. Just need to change the battery on my camera. So they treat them as stories, as theological historian traditions, not direct history. So why do we still use biblical dates, one would ask? Even if we don't believe in the literal word-for-word basis of those stories, we still try to reconstruct timelines, as I mentioned. The internal logic of the text, for example, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Egypt, Moses, requires a certain sequence. And then that's the building blocks. And then we look at the cultural influences within those stories and we match those with archaeological evidence and we say, aha, we're onto something here. So if you accept that Moses was dated somewhere around 1300 BCE, very loosely, then Abraham would have been, several centuries earlier. Because 400 years from there would have been Joseph, then Jacob, and then the great-grandfather would have been Abraham. So even if the details are legendary, the broad strokes help place Abraham in a rough historical context. So let's stamp that now and let's see who was around at that time and what peoples were there. And now let's have a look at the archaeological evidence to see if it matches certain biblical stories. So as I said, we don't just rely on the scripture. We have to now match this with the archaeological evidence, parallel evidence. So cultural parallels in Genesis. We have the Nuzi tablets from a city called Nuzi in Syria, I believe, and the Mari archives. This is 1800 BCE. It shows family customs like adoption for inheritance, servants as heirs, like Eliezer in Genesis, same kind of a story, and sister-wife claims like Abraham and Sarah. Interesting, getting very warm. These match the Middle Bronze Age. So these stories that we're looking at are specific to a culture or a group of cultures marrying a specific, placed firmly inside a timeline. Bingo. So you've got the timeline of Abraham in the Bible, and then you've got the timeline that we've crafted, looking at evidence, archaeological evidence that has parallels in the Bible, and it seems to match. You see what's happening here now? That's how we can date. So now all we need to do is find out who these people were and narrow it down even more. So these match the Middle Bronze Age period. So even if you doubt the chronology, the culture in Genesis reflects the Amorite period Mesopotamian world. So not the Sumerians, not the Akkadians, not the Assyrians, but the Amorites, which does support a Bronze Age Abraham. So let's have a look here now. So traditional view, born of the Chaldees, likely from Ur, or the scholarly view is that he was not of the Chaldees, but of Ur, or a northern Mesopotamian region of Amorite culture. Amorite, remember that now. Timeline, the traditional view is 2000 BCE, 400 years before Moses. We've taken that down a bit, 300 years to 100 years earlier than that, based on Bronze Age cultural contexts. Ur of the Chaldees, literal location, anachronism, we don't believe that. Journey, he migrated to Canaan in the Bible. It reflects known Amorite migration patterns. Personal details, the Bible says he was a real historical person with direct divine guidance, possibly a composite tribal ancestor or legendary figure. Today, archaeologists and historians will say. Cultural fit, customs described in Genesis reflect his time. Marriage, inheritance, travel match Bronze Age Mesopotamia. Relation of Egypt, Abraham visited Egypt due to a famine. The Quran doesn't mention this. Quran mentions Abraham visiting Egypt, but the Bible goes further and says it was due to a famine. So another famine happened 500 years earlier that also made them go down south again. Possible echo of Bronze Age migration routes, not confirmed historically. Historical evidence, assumed historical based on scripture. No direct archaeological or textual evidence of Abraham as an individual, but we have incidental evidence which we just touched upon now. We want more proof. We are not amused, sir. We need more proof. Why do scholars think Abraham was Amorite? Not Assyrian, not Sumerian, and not Akkadian, who I actually thought he was Assyrian or Akkadian, possibly even Sumerian. But it was a surprise to me to find out he was Amorite. Why Amorite? It comes to four main pieces of evidence: language, names, movement patterns, and cultural contexts. So let's look at the linguistic evidence. Many names in Abraham's family line, including Abraham and Terah, have West Semitic Amorite roots, not Sumerian and not Akkadian. The Amorite Semitic language is a West Semitic language. So, for example, Abram is a West Semitic word. It means exalted father, and it's an Amorite style name, which gives an idea that possibly Abraham's name may not have even been Abraham. That's just a name that, because he's an exalted, he became the father of these people, he got called Abram, right? Like, for example, Stalin, that's not his real name, man of steel. Like Timur, Tamerlane, that was his name actually. Timur also means man of steel. But you have figures in society that become something else, like Ataturk, right? Or Turkmenbashi, the self-styled Turkmenbashi in Turkmenistan, the father of all Turkish people. He's a dictator. Likewise, Ataturk. These are not their original names, but the names that they adopt or are given to them. So likewise, Abraham, for me, it seems like it's a name, a title given. His original name could have been something else. The Bible refers to him as Ibrāhīm, which is the Arabic rendition of the name Abraham. Abram, Amorite, Abram. Sarah became Sarah, as we know in the Bible, the wife of Ibrāhīm, was Sarai in the Semitic language, a princess, noblewoman, Amorite or early Canaanite. And then we have Laban, Nahor, Milcah. These are West Semitic names common in the Amorite Mari names. So we find these specific names in the Bible having common names, parallel type names in the Amorite sphere, not Sumerian or Akkadian. The Mari archives from the 18th century BCE, northern Mesopotamia, show hundreds of names like those used by Amorite speaking tribal groups. So we can know this for sure. Number 2, geography. Abraham comes from Ur, but then moves to Haran, northwest Mesopotamia, and then Canaan. Haran is southern Turkey, I think. Right? So Abraham went down the Fertile Crescent, went up, and then went back down again. This mirrors known Amorite migration pathways, this way and that way. The Amorites were West Semitic nomads who moved from Syria and northern Mesopotamia into Canaan and Babylon, this way. Right? And then obviously migration, because their homelands are here, they moved this way and then they would move back the same way. And also for trade. Abraham, so they were not urban Sumerians, they were nomadic people. In fact, the Sumerians and the Akkadians looked down upon them. There's a poem that they write, one of a marriage between their god and their god, Akkadian Sumerian god with an Amorite god, and they're writing a derogatory poem basically saying, how can you, O God, marry this said God when they are blah blah blah, X, Y, and Z, right? Not nice terms in the poem. So they looked down upon these people because they were nomads. Nomads are seen as barbarians. These are civilized Sumerians and Akkadians. They were seen as outsiders and conquerors. So Abraham, his whole people were a semi-nomadic kind of people living in tents, possibly flocks, and having altars. Fits the Amorite tribal culture, not Sumerian urban elite life. Number 3, biblical Hebrew is closest to Amorite language. The Hebrew is a Canaanite dialect of Northwest Semitic, which is linguistically related to Amorite because it's the same language area, West Semitic. That puts Abraham's language family squarely within the Amorite linguistic world, not Sumerian, which is a linguistic isolate, or Akkadian, which is East Semitic. Number 4, this is a very interesting one for me. Customs and legal parallels. Abraham's world, marrying a half-sister in Genesis, naming a slave his heir, Eliza, covenants, bride price, matches, laws. All of this is mentioned in the Mari tablets, in the Amorite kingdom, and the Nuza texts. These customs do not match Sumerian law from earlier eras. We know this because we have the law code of Ur-Nana, and we have the Hammurabi code would be an Amorite code, but Ur-Nama code we have, and these practices don't match. And you could safely assume that the Akkadians would follow the Sumerian practices as well. So why Abraham is linked to the Amorites, we know now. The name, linguistic, Abraham, Sarai, Laban, right, points to the Amorites. From Mesopotamia, Haran, Canaan, the same area, movement patterns. And then the covenant inheritance laws, the Maru-Nuzi tablets, again is Amorite. So firmly now we have this idea. But we're going to go deeper, we're going to think critically. Some answers, some questions arise even from the evidence we've seen so far. One of the evidence is Abraham could have been anything. He could have been Chinese for all we know. Nothing conclusively proves Abraham to have been who we are claiming now, an Amorite. Why? Because all peoples move along familiar trade routes. And they weren't going to cut across the desert like this. If you want to get to the Levant from Iraq, you have to go through the Fertile Crescent. And all traders use those routes, whether they were from Anatolia, the Hittites, the Amorites, possibly even some Indus Valley dudes. Right? So why are we so quick and ready to say he was an Amorite? We're historians, let's dig deeper. So trade routes in ancient Near East weren't used by only one group. Peoples moved east and west, north, south for a millennia, not just the Amorites. As I said, the fact that Abraham followed this path doesn't prove he was Amorite. It just fits a known migration pattern for the time. Others used them, as I said. So migration patterns are suggestive, not conclusive. Objection 2, he could have adopted the culture of the places he went to. If you end up spending a time with the people, as I said, you adopt their culture. I've been in Uzbekistan for a year and a half now, and certain practices I've adopted. Certain food styles I've got used to. Certain idioms, expressions, ways of talking, walking, you do. In my time in Saudi, I adopted theirs. Right? So this is a known thing that happens. So, for example, in fact, Abraham's story in Genesis shows him interacting with the Egyptians, Hittites, Canaanites, Philistines, and the Mesopotamians. Right? So he could have been any one of them or just adopted their culture. Some of the customs in Genesis may reflect the cultures Abraham encountered, not necessarily his own, but scholars point out that some core customs like naming slaves as heirs and cousin marriage practices appear in Abraham's household, not just the surrounding people. So you have an isolated culture that is specific to Abraham's household, but we don't find it in the surrounding cultures. So that pinpoints it to the Amorites once again. These match Amorite practices and are not cultural borrowings. Okay, so let's go back to our main idea, but then we have a look at another objection. Couldn't the people of Canaan have similar practices? Yes, all of the ancient Near East shared culture. I'm in Central Asia. There's 6 countries named Stan. 5 of them share a shared heritage and a culture, even though linguistically they're different. If you go to the Gulf, you're amongst 5 countries, different peoples, but sharing the same culture. The Assyrians of Iraq, share the same culture as the Arabs. The Bedouin Arabs of Jordan share the same culture as the southern Arabs, the Bedouin Arabs of Iraq and Arabia proper, Saudi Arabia. The Yemenites, all of them share a similar culture. In fact, they share a culture with Ethiopia. The Ethiopians and the Amharic people, the Abyssinians, the Ethiopians, Abyssinians, and the Horn of Africa, so that's Djibouti and Eritrea, they share some parallels with Yemen. If you go into the Levant area, the greater Levant area shares some parallels with Turkey, Anatolia, and even the Romans, Italy, right? The Mediterranean basin, everything around there. So all of these could have had these cultures. It doesn't mean that just because we don't find, we don't find references and we can isolate it, they could be shared practices. So that doesn't lend to proof that it's one person doing it. The Amorite Canaanites, early Israelites, and even the Hurrians shared similar Semitic roots and overlapping customs. So it's often possible to say it's often impossible to say who started what. It's not that the Amorites brought practices to Canaan. More accurately, Amorites and early Canaanites were part of the same cultural world and ideas flowed in both directions. So we cannot say, again, this breaks the argument that there was a cultural something that was exclusive to Abraham. Did Abraham spread it into this area, or did they give it to Abraham's culture, or were they both sharing it? Right? That's why Abraham could reflect a broader Semitic tribal culture, not just Amorite. Objection 4. Where did the Amorites come from originally? They were a West Semitic tribe. They likely originated in the Syrian steppe region, modern-day Syria-Iraq border, which is right at the top left-hand side of the Fertile Crescent. They came into southern Mesopotamia. This is Babylon, Mari area, into northern Mesopotamia and into Canaan. So they went this way. They were not a unified empire, more like tribal confederations that moved and settled in different places. So when we call Abraham Amorite, it's not about race or empire. It's about his tribal, linguistic, cultural affiliation in a shared Semitic world. So it's like saying Turco-Mongol today. Their genetic ancestry is so mixed that even though they speak a Turkic language, their roots may be Mongol and their cultural expression Persianite, like in Uzbekistan. The cultural expression is 50% Persian with Turkic, but then their bloodlines are Turco-Mongol. Right? So it's like that now. So was he pure bred Amorite, or was it a mixture again? Did he represent many peoples? I would like to think he was a purebred Amorite. It just makes it more romantic knowing that our prophet was none of what we thought he was, but he was Amorite. We don't know much of prophets out of this affair. We don't know Chinese prophets or Japanese prophets or Zulu prophets. We only know about Arab kind of Semitic kind of prophets. So to add another one into a mix, Amorite, it's charming. So Abraham's culture reflects that of an Amorite period Semitic tribes, but this doesn't mean he was ethnically Amorite in any narrow sense. He likely belonged to the larger West Semitic tribal world that included Amorites, early Canaanites, and Proto-Hebrews, all moving, trading, and adopting across a connecting cultural zone. Wait, there's more. We haven't ended. Adoption for inheritance. Now we're getting to the cream. This soup that we've cooked up is now giving off froth, and now we're getting to that part. In Genesis, in the context, in ancient times, having a male heir was very crucial, right? Think Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, adopting Zayd ibn Harith and saying he adopts from me, he inherits from me, and I inherit from him. And then the inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwal abtar. Verily you are the one cut off. Huwal abtar, he is cut off. He is cut off. Because Rasul's son died, and his own Quraysh cousins, uncles, distant uncles laughed and enjoyed that moment and said he's cut off. There's no male heir, he's only got daughters. Can you imagine, your son's died, and then enemies can mock, but your own family, your own blood, that's what happened. And then Allah said, verily you are cut off. Rasul look, the whole ummah, one son, and then the whole ummah praising Rasul, the angels praising Rasul. You are the ones who are cut off. He is cut off. He is in hellfire with no sons availing him. So he would inherit land, continue the family name, and care for aging parents. If a man had no biological sons, adoption became a culturally accepted solution. So in Genesis, Abraham says, "O Lord God, what will you give me, since I am childless and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus, i.e. a slave? You have given me no offspring, so a servant of my household will be my heir." So this is the prayer of Abraham to God. This is the lament, this is the complaint. This shows Abraham is considering someone outside his immediate bloodline, his household servant, as a legal heir. This reflects common practices of the time. We have parallels in the Nuzi tablets of the Amorites, which reveals that childless couples often adopted someone, sometimes even an adult, to inherit their property, to take care of them in old age and carry the family name forward. These adoptees could be a slave servant or a relative like a nephew. Abraham left with Lot, his nephew. Even an outsider, provided they agree to the inheritance terms. One Nuzi document records a man adopting a servant with the clear condition that he would care for the adopter and inherit the estate in the absence of biological sons. So key legal features of adoption in the Nuzi tablets: the adopted son was legally binding, just like a blood relative. Like I said, think of Rasulullah when he said, he inherits from me and I inherit from him. The adoptive father could revoke the adoption if the son disobeyed or failed in his duties. This adoption was often formalized with witnesses and contracts. Again, think the later Arab custom. It was done in front of the Kaʿbah by Rasulullah. Only later did Allah say this kind of adoption is not like real adoption. Like he doesn't become your real son. The bloodlines stay separate, right? The inheritance laws stay separate. And then there is hijab as well. So who practiced adoption for inheritance? The Hurrians at Nuzi. They were influenced by Amorite customs. The clearest and most formal example, legal contracts describe adoption of slaves, nephews, or outsiders. Conditions were very specific: inheritance rights in exchange for lifelong care. Mari, the Amorite city-state, also shows some adoption and inheritance customs, though fewer details survive. The Babylonians, the Code of Hammurabi, who was an Amorite, includes laws of adoption. You can go into Google and see these laws. Adopted sons had legal rights. If they failed in their duties, they were annulled. Biological sons could challenge adopted sons under certain conditions. For example, Law 185 of Hammurabi states, if a man takes in a child and rears him as a son, he shall not be expelled. You can see this on the stele of Hammurabi, his legal code. The Hittites, adoption wasn't as common, but some legal codes allowed for it under special circumstances. The Egyptians, adoption was rare and not well documented in the same way. And the Egyptians have a lot of documentation, but this was something very rare for them. Inheritance tended to stay within bloodlines, so you'd go to cousins or something like this. However, informal forms of inheritance, elevated a trusted servant, did exist. I mean, it was optional. Not many would do it, but it's optional. Once again, this is evidence that can all be challenged, because all of a sudden, if you find something in Egyptian archives or something in the Hittites, again, you can challenge this evidence as well. I'm just thinking like a historian now. Sister-wife claims. Let's have a look at something else. Genesis says to us there were 2 episodes. We as Muslims know of one episode where Abraham said to Sarah, you and I are the only Muslims on earth. Let the king know that you are my sister. Tell him you're my sister. When Abraham lied, right, we say a lie. In theology, we're taught the meaning of this. I'm just using the word here for the sake of this lecture. He changed the truth and said to the king and his people, he said, she is my sister. And he told her to say the same thing, right? Why? We'll have a look at in a minute. Bible actually references 2 or 3 times this happened. So the Quran mentions this story just happening once, but it's happened a few times in the Bible. So there were 2 episodes when Abraham refers to Sarah not as his wife but as his sister. And then there's a 3rd episode, Abraham. So we'll look at the 3rd episode. But Abraham tells Pharaoh, she is my sister. Just like in the Quran, just like in the Islamic story, Abraham tells Pharaoh. Abraham tells the king. No, I'm not going to say Pharaoh, and I'll tell you why. She is my sister. So Pharaoh takes her into his palace. This is what the Bible says. Also in Gerar, the same thing happened. Abraham again says, she is my sister to King Abimelech. This is not mentioned in the Quran, right? Only once is mentioned in the Quran. When confronted, Abraham explains, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. So he's trying to say she's my stepsister. We have problems with this because laws don't change. And sister marriage, even stepsister, we have firm laws in Islam. So I don't think this is even possible. This is probably a made up story. So technically, Sarah is Abraham's half sister, but by not saying she was also his wife, Abraham created a misleading impression. Why would this be? Let's go by the Islamic account. Forget half sister business. That's his wife. Why does he say to the Pharaoh? Here we go again. This is the first time I've done this, by the way. Normally I have to edit this. So why does he do it? Before we open up the next slide, I'll tell you why he did it. If you're in a land and you're a small people, when outsiders come into your land, you know about it. The king will find out, people will find out, because your city-states, your tiny cities, the size of towns, walled, right? Only a few kilometer walls. Everybody knows the strangers come. Strangers have no protection. Kings have power and influence. They see an exotic person. Bride stealing happens all over the world. It's very easy to steal a bride. What can the man do? You have to kill the man. So if Abraham said, I am her husband and I shall protect her, the king will say, right, dispose of him. The soldiers would have killed Abraham, and then the king would have taken her as a slave or married her, and that's the end of it. But if Abraham says, she is my sister, the king will then honor Abraham. The king will then take him as a brother-in-law. And Abraham, or whoever this happens to, shall be honored and put in a position of power, and then at a later stage he'll be in a position to rescue his wife again. So these are the reasons why Abraham said, she is my sister. Right? It gives a breathing space to then think of plan B, and plan B Allah took care of. So Abraham's reasoning, Genesis, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. There you go. So this was a defensive strategy. The Quran doesn't mention this, so it forces us to come to this conclusion. Or we look in the Bible, and this is the reasoning the Bible gives us. And it certainly makes sense, right? Calling Sarah his sister may have protected Abraham from being killed by rulers who might have wanted Sarah. He also allowed Sarah to be treated as a free woman. So if he kills the husband, he's taking the woman as a slave. These were the laws of the ancients. You kill a husband, who's going to take care of the woman now? You take her in as a slave into your harem. But if you marry her with honor, if you treat her, if she's a free woman, she's not going to become a slave. She stays a free woman, because you now honor her brother, and he becomes honored close to the king, and the woman stays a free woman, and a free woman has rights and privileges, and she can plan her own escape and many such things. If it allowed Sarah to be treated as a free woman, not someone's wife, which may have influenced how she was approached. And exactly, this is the next part. So the biblical account, Abraham refers to Seerah as his sister on multiple occasions in Egypt, in Gerar, and the third occasion I mentioned to you is actually Isaac. He repeats the same with Rebecca, one of his wives. The same thing happened to him as well. Amorite practice. This repetition implies a known social strategy, not mere deception, but a practice that had cultural grounding. Amorites were a Semitic-speaking nomadic people. We should know this by now. They eventually established powerful kingdoms such as Babylon under Hammurabi. The Amorites practiced endogamy, marrying within tribal groups, and had specific customs around kingship terminology and legal protections. The sister-wife practice, we have this in the legal codes of the Amorites as well. A sister could mean, by actually calling your wife, you're giving a legal status to her that elevates her, by calling your wife a sister, right? Not in reality, but just for the purposes of law. A wife referred to as a sister could be under the man's legal protection, offering her greater security in a foreign or dangerous environment. This terminology appears in Mesopotamian marriage contracts, particularly among Amorite-speaking people. Why this matters again now, because this is proof for us that Abraham's use of the term sister aligns with Amorite social legal norms rather than deception. But we are, this is an argument that you can take forward, but I'm not going to take it forward here. In Ur, Abraham's birthplace was under Amorite influence. We know that now. At the time, we think he was around. Scholars suggest this supports the idea that Abraham was Amorite in culture and possibly in ethnic origin, which is what I think. More cultural parallels. Let's look at the Nuzi tablets. The Nuzi tablets from northern Mesopotamia around the same timeline show that a man could designate his wife as his sister in legal documents. This was to elevate her social status, ensure she received inheritance rights, gave her more protection under the law. One Nuzi record shows a woman listed as both wife and sister, a legal status that gave her stronger standing in the household. In some contexts, sister didn't mean biological sibling, but rather a formal title showing closeness, honor, or special legal role. The understanding we have as Muslims is Abraham says, when he said, she is my sister, she is sister in faith. Because Abraham is supposedly has said to his wife, there is no Muslims on earth. You and I are the only people in faith. We are the only two in faith. A man and a woman, brother and sister in faith. We say, oh sister, I'm speaking to a sister for marriage. I'm speaking to this sister for marriage. And the girl says, I'm speaking to an akh for marriage. What brother? What sister? Brother in faith, sister in faith. Abraham says we are brother and sister in faith. This is one understanding. And it ties in with what's happening here with the Amorites, right? So this is especially useful in patriarchal societies where male guardianship defines a woman's rights. Why would this happen in places like Egypt or Gerar? A woman without a male guardian would be vulnerable. The Amorites are on the move. Cultural exchange. When you're moving from one place to another, you don't have tribal protection. You're alone. You're entering powerful civilizations alone, unchallenged. Unchallenged is the wrong word. They are unchallenged. They can challenge you and you can do nothing. You can't challenge them back. They are unchallenged. You are challenged. A sister might be viewed as independent or available for marriage. So you don't need to kill her. You don't need to kill the man, the male guardian. You don't need to kill him because he's the one that's going to give her to you, right? The brother or the father or the uncle marries you off. It's done respectfully. Whereas if he's a husband, off with his head. It's easy. A wife, however, could get her household into trouble, possibly leading to the husband being eliminated. So in this case, Abraham might have been using a culturally accepted legal fiction to avoid danger, buy time, shift responsibility for Sarah's safety. Enter the help of Allah now. Just before that, relevance to the ancient world, these types of sister-wife titles or arrangements show up in other ancient texts too, not just in the Bible. It highlights how family, marriage and law overlapped in complex ways. Genesis is not presenting bizarre behavior, by the way. Many a time Muslims read this and they don't understand. Right? At least the Bible gives us a clue. The Quran doesn't. The Quran just says, she's my sister. Why would Abraham say that? But it's not bizarre. It seems even more strange looking at it from the Quranic context because there's no clue. You have to really think why. The Bible gives one clue. But when we look at archaeological evidence and then understand everything, we can then surmise and say, aha, so this was what was really going on. It no longer seems bizarre. It shows a realistic strategy used in ancient societies. Now, the Amorites. So we now can safely assume that he was from the Amorite Safir, most likely an Amorite. Who are the Amorites? They were Semitic nomadic people from the western deserts of modern-day Syria. They migrated into Mesopotamia and Canaan around 2000 BCE. That's 4,000 years ago they started coming down. Known in Akkadian as Amuru, and their land as Land of the West. Played a major role in Mesopotamian politics, especially during the decline of the Sumerian and Akkadian rule. Initially appeared in Sumerian records. So 4,500 years ago, they appeared in Sumerian records. They expanded and ruled most of the Levant, Mesopotamia, and parts of Egypt from the 21st century BC to the late 17th century BC. The term Amaru in Akkadian and Sumerian texts refers to the Amorites. So Abraham would have been familiar with the word Amaru. So this is something new now, we've just learnt. Right? Forget the word Yahud. The Yahud probably didn't even exist at that time. Forget Islam or, the name Allah. Yes, we know. How did Abraham even call upon Allah? Was it Allah? This is Arabic. Right? The Jews, Elohim. Christians, Al-Ilah. El is the Semitic word for God. So how did Abraham call upon God? He probably used something like El. But now you're coming across a word outside of religion, because we tend to think of Abraham just in religious terms. So you see the word Amaru. Say this on your tongue, Amaru. Because Abraham would have, like we say, we are Arabs, or we are Palestinians, or we are Persians, or we are Turks, or we are Rajputs. Right? He could have said, we are Amaru, the plural of that. Or he could have said, I am Amaru. Right? It's a large tribal name. He would have probably had names underneath that he would have identified as. But who knows? I am Amaru. Subhanallah. Right? Just think about that. Think as a historian for a moment and connect with your Prophet outside of religion, culturally, linguistically. So they played a major role. Sorry, just going to take some medicine. Played a major role in Mesopotamian politics, especially during the decline of the Sumerian period. The term Amaru in Akkadian and Sumerian texts refers to the Amorites, their principal deity, and an Amorite kingdom. They called their principal deity Amaru, but I didn't find any concrete evidence for this, by the way. So they settled in cities. So the Amorites, we know, settled. They came down from the north. So Abraham's people came down from the north and settled in the city-states like Mari, Babylon, and Lhasa. It's on the map in the beginning. Hammurabi, the famous lawgiver, was an Amorite king of Babylon, integrated into Mesopotamian civilization while keeping distinct customs. So they had distinct customs and they integrated into Mesopotamian society as well, borrowing from them as well. They're mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as inhabitants of Canaan, both before and after the conquest of the land under Joshua. This is Hammurabi. I made a spelling mistake here. Hammurabi, standing receiving his royal insignia from Shamash, or possibly Marduk. Shamash is the sun god and Marduk is another god of the Babylonians. There you can see Hammurabi standing there. On the left hand side is the legal code. There is etched writing into this stele. It's in the Louvre Museum in Paris, and you can get details of this online and you can read the legal codes. On that tablet is the legal code. This is the oldest complete legal code on earth. And there is it written, his name written in the Amorite, Sumerian, Akkadian, the Syrian script. The script is the same, but the language would be Amorite. So what do we know about their culture and their religion? They spoke an early northwest Semitic dialect. They practiced ancestor veneration, worshipped gods like Amaru, Dagon, and El. Look, there's the mention of El. Semitic. El, we know as God, right? The God. Now at that time, was El, like the pagan Arabs knew, was it Allah as a distant God and then a pantheon underneath Allah who they would invoke? Or was El so distorted that it was no longer Allah under the name of El, and it was another deity that they recognized, like a high God, but it wasn't Allah anymore, right? I don't know. Further research is needed, and I don't think we'll get detailed answers on this anyway. There's many ways of interpreting steles and understandings of deities, but probably the name was, by that time, it was a corruption. They no longer recognize Allah for who Allah was. Like, for example, the Jews know Elohim. The name may be different, but the deity, the God, the one God being identified is exactly Allah. The Christians, what they know as the Father, yes, they've corrupted it, 3 in 1, and then, the essence of Christ, is Christ holy, divine, or half human and half divine, and he's a son of God, so God had a son. That's problematic. That's just clear-cut shirk and kufr. But the idea that there is Jesus Christ has a father and the father is God, that God is the same God in identity as the Jewish God Elohim, in Aramaic Al-Ilah, and then Allah in Arabic. It's the same God, right? So we can say that for sure. But when we look at the name El for the Amorites or the Syrians or the Akkadians, was it the same thing? Or was it a bad corruption somewhere of an understanding of God that no longer is God? Like we look at Ahura Mazda, the god of the Persians. Ahura Mazda, wise Lord. Al-Hakim, one of the names of God. An attribute attributed to their God, wise Lord. Allah is the Lord, wise Lord. And then when you start looking further at their religion, you find out that there is a duality, an interplay between, Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, good and evil. Basically, Ahriman is like a shaitan type figure, and then there's a parallel duality. One of them cannot gain precedence or power over the other. It's an interplay. Whereas in the earliest renditions, I think it was just Ahura Mazda, whereas Satan, shaitan, Ahriman was a lesser figure. And there are parallels of certain practices, ideas in the religion of the Zoroastrians that parallel things that we know as Muslims or the Jews would know, right? So you're thinking, okay, was the root the same, but did they corrupt the religion so much that now all of a sudden there's a 50-50 playoff between the devil force and the God force, and they're 50-50 now, right? So a changing of ideas. So, but then that's like a different domain, right? That's like, an Indo-Aryan domain. Names are different. The pantheons become different. It's a whole other area of research. Who was Ahura Mazda originally? Was it Allah or was it another God that they just borrowed from Allah and gave attributes over there and then forgot Allah? This is a whole other subject area to research on, but we're keeping it tightly in the Semitic word. The word El. El is a deity that was known to the Amorites, the people of Ibrāhīm al-Islam. Abraham would have known this name. Tribal structures with strong emphasis on clan loyalty and mobility. Customs often reflected in laws, marriage practices, and kinship terminology. We've been through all of this. Abraham lived during the peak of the Amorite migrations. His name and lifestyle match Amorite naming patterns and customs. The wife-sister custom aligns with Amorite legal traditions, and Genesis mentions Abraham's allies with Amorites. He's also allied with Anna, Eshkol, and Mamre. This is another evidence that the Quran doesn't mention or the Hadith doesn't mention. Like I said, the Quran just mentions the theology behind the story. All of this historical stuff the Quran doesn't go into. It doesn't need to go into. So we're forced to look at the Bible as a first point and say, well, these are the stories in the Bible. They don't match the Quran. So we cannot affirm or negate, and we say, well, Allahu A'lam, right? All of this may be true for all we know. All of this may be just made up stories that they forgot, and they just ended up Chinese whispers, and it became these stories, right? But if I, as a Muslim, said, I believe here means I think that Abraham was allied with these tribes, and I made up a story, and I said, this is actually this would be more sensible than what Muslims did when they narrated fantastical stories, right, about Nimrod, and about Nimrod trying to get up to heaven, and his sedan. A sedan is basically a chair that's carried. That's where we get the name sedan from. We have cavalier. It's a different type of sedan. And these coaches that the Victorians had before, they were chairs, right? Sedan. And then a cavalier is a type of a coach drawn by horses. And these are just names. So the sedan that Nimrod had 4 birds attached, vultures or eagles, powerful birds, and then they flew, and he would give them meat, and then they would fly up and then fly to the heavens, and he challenged God. And Muslims would narrate these stories, right? And you're getting them where? From Rawayat al-Israeliyat, from the traditions and legends of the Jews. So if you're going to narrate fantastical stories like that nobody would believe is true, then certainly I would say, well, this is probably more plausible, right? It's not a problem for me to say, well, it's not a part of theology. I will not be committing kufr if I say, well, I believe Abraham was allied to these particular tribes. Right? If you can believe that Nimrod flew and all those fantastical stories, then certainly this is more plausible, because Abraham would need certain allies from his own tribes. And Lot, we find that Prophet Lot is a story associated with him. We know the story of Lot and his the people of Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And the angels came to destroy them. And the Arabs call homosexuals Lutis. I don't know how correct we should use that name, because you've now attributed a prophetic name to a very unprophetic act, right? But that's what they call them. So Abraham, Lot, the story is mentioned in the Quran and the Bible, right? But the Bible mentions an additional story, that Lot was taken prisoner by 4 kings that came from the east, the Fertile Crescent, and Abraham had to use his allies from Canaan, God knows, like 70 people or something, went and fought with the king's armies and released Lot. Subhanallah. Is this a true story or not? God knows. Would I like to believe it's true? Certainly I would. It's a very charming story, very romantic story. Do I believe it's true? Inside me, I hold my tongue. Why? Because we're talking about the Bible, right? And we, I still bring in theology and say silence is good. But the Quran commentators and the ones who picked up these fantastical stories certainly weren't silent regarding Rawayat Israeliyat. So key points from the key takeaway from this is the Amorites were major players in Abraham's world. Their migration reshaped Mesopotamia and Canaan. Abraham's life reflects Amorite customs and social patterns. This supports the view that Abraham was culturally Amorite, and I believe ethnically too. Here is a map showing where the Amorites were. So these are the various Amorite states, these names that you're looking at. Abraham would have possibly known some of these names. The Hittites are far in the north. The Hittites fought the famous battle they had in Kadesh with the Ramses, right? The famous battle. Ramses has his own version of it, and the Hittites have their own version. And we find out today that Ramses' version was very overhyped. The reality wasn't as Ramses put it. We have the Hurrians, who are, if I'm not mistaken, like an Indo-Aryan type people in the north. The Elamites also Indo-Aryan type people. And then we have the Semitic people in the middle. So we have Babylonia, Mari, Yamhad, Katna. These are Amorite kingdoms. You can see those famous cities again. I'm not going to name them again. I was trying to find a name that we could identify as names. Damascus is showing, but I don't think Damascus existed. Actually, Damascus did. Damascus has been inhabited for a very long time. I don't know its name though. So now let's have a look at their gods. What gods did the Amorites worship? Because when you hear these names, for sure these are the names that Abraham would have known. Are you telling me that in the time of Rasulullah he didn't know about the various 360 idols that were around the Kaaba? People would mention them in their conversations all the time. We only know the names of a few. The Quran mentions the names of a few: Lat, Manat, Uzza, and Hubal is, I don't think Hubal is mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in Hadith. Whereas there was 360 deities. And we learnt in our previous lessons that the other deities, the names came up. We sourced Allat, we sourced Uzza, we sourced these deities. So are you telling me that the names I'm going to give you now, Abraham didn't know them? When he was hearing them, he was disgusted by them, he was mocking them. Of course he knew them, right? So these names now are names that would have passed through Abraham's ear. So pay attention to these names. So Dagon, who is identified with Enlil. Do you remember I said to you Enlil? So all of them know Enlil as Enlil, right? But Dagon was what the Amorites knew it as. Dagon was the supreme god in many cities in the Euphrates region of Upper Mesopotamia, especially at sites such as Mari and Tutul and Tarka. Babylonian texts refer to the chief god of the Amorites as Amaru, the Martu in their language, read as Ilu Amaru, corresponding to their name for the ethnic group. They also identify his consort as the goddess Asratum. Kamis, an otherwise poorly attested deity, largely known from Akkadian and Amorite theophoric names. So we don't know much about this deity, but people's names, such as, like for example, a theophoric name would be Abdullah or Abdul Jabbar, Abdul Qadir, Abdul Malik. Abdul, slave of who? Al Qadir, Allah. Abdul Malik, Abdul Razzaq. Abdul, the slave of the provider, the giver of food. So likewise we have Nebu Naid, Nebu or Nebuchadrezzar. Nebu is the deity as the prefix. So we know this name, Kamis, from theophoric names. Like we have Abdul Uzza and those kind of names amongst the Arabs as well. So Astratum, whose name is cognate with Asherah and is identified with Belet Ili. Asherah in Arabic would be Asherah, Sirius. Something for me to look into. Yarahum, the moon god, who is named Yarikh at Ugarit. He is identified with the god Sin. Rasapum equates with Nergal and also known from Ebla, a god with an incompletely reconstructed name, possibly Arum, who is identified with Usum. Halumu, identified with Sabula, a deity in the netherworld god circle. Hanutum, who is here identified with Ishtar. Pidri, previously known only from the late Bronze Age Ugaritic text, and later in the bilingual list she is identified with Nanania. Asituhalti, who is identified with Istrahan, the tutelary deity of the city of Deir. This list is not complete, by the way, but have you noticed the pattern here? Ashtra Hum, Yarahum, Rasapum. This is the language of Abraham's time. Their gods are named in like a similar style, right? Is that a suffix meaning something? Right? So imagine that same suffix applied to many other words in the time of Abraham. Right? It's fascinating to know this. Who cares about the gods? I mean, it's just names of gods. But it's fascinating to know that Abraham, these patterns would have been familiar. You would have never thought that there would have been some patterns that were familiar to Abraham, because you don't think along those lines. And what were those patterns? These patterns. And did they reflect outside of deity names as well? A fascinating thing to think about. This is a cuneiform clay tablet from the Amorite kingdom of Mari, first half of the 2nd millennium BCE. That's the Amorite language written right there. Shamas. Now the god Shamas, surrounded by worshippers. You can see the star. You can see there's a star. It's like a star with the solar disk, and surrounded by his worshippers. Look at the way they're all dressed. They all have different hats on, different styles of dress on. Some of them are dressed more elaborate. It's probably a king or the high priests, and the other guys beside them, are dressed normally. Are they slaves, or one looks like a soldier, another one could be a noble or something like this. On the right hand side, seated is Shamas. The two lions there symbolize something. In his hand, what he's holding symbolizes something, and in the cuneiform writing, and above you have three symbols. You have Sin, you have Ishtar, and you have Shamas. Venus, the moon, and the sun. The star of Shamas, right? This is very interesting. The Assyrian Christians still use this star as their symbol. So this is the third thing we've seen now coming back all the way from prehistory. We've got Tammuz as the month of July. We've got the ziggurat, and we've got this particular symbol, and we've got the Favahar as well. So this is in a newspaper of theirs from 1972. They've got the star symbol on the left hand side, and if you type in Iraqi Assyrian Christians, you'd see their flag. This is their flag, and that same symbol comes from where? Shamas. This is the 18th century BCE, a very old symbol indeed. This is Enlil. Enlil, later known as Elil or Elil, is an ancient Mesopotamian god associated with wind, earth, air, and storms. He is first attested as the chief deity of the Sumerian pantheon, but he was later worshipped by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Hurrians. The god Enlil seated here with clenched fist holds on an object now lost from the scribal quarter at Nippur. So this is what they found in the scribal quarter in the originally when I showed you the picture. Look, he's bearded. He's got a hat, and he was supposed to be holding something. Poor guy lost it. This is baked clay, and there's still traces of paint. Red and black paint can be seen on him. This is displayed in the Museum of Baghdad. And what's interesting is the Sphinx in Egypt, also its beard and under its chin, they still have red paint as well. Thousands of years later. Amazing. Sin, right, or Sion in Akkadian, Denzu, also known as Nana in Sumerian. Zezki, Nana, is a Mesopotamian god representing the moon, Sin. While these two names originate in two different languages, respectively Akkadian and Sumerian, they were already used interchangeably to refer to one deity in the early dynastic period. So the names were interchangeable, but they recognized them as one deity. They were sometimes combined into the double name Nanasun, a third well-attested name Dilimbabar. This is the first time I've heard this. Additionally, the name of the moon god could be represented by lolograms reflecting his lunar character, such as D30. So this is like it represents, so they would have this symbol that represents 30. So then you think, okay, this is the moon god because of the 30-day solar cycle, 6 months of the year, 30, 6 months, 29. Here we have symbols representing Ishtar in the center, Sin in the center, Ishtar in the left, and Shamas on the right, as depicted on the upper half of a kuduru. Kuduru is, I don't know what this is, tablet or whatever. That looks like a king, and two people come to see him. But the three gods are there. So around about this time, which dynasty of the Amorites was ruling? It was the Ur-3 dynasty. Their capital was indeed Ur in southern Iraq, the same city. The key kings were Ur-Nama, founder famous for the first known law code, and Shulgi, a powerful ruler, centralized administration. This was a Sumerian dynasty. If Abraham lived earlier, he might have been alive under this rule. Right. Okay. So so the Ur dynasty was ruling at this particular time, right? Not at Abraham's time, but this was in Ur. So the same city, generation after generation, 1,000 year after 1,000 year, people living. Then later, so we're moving closer now to the time of Abraham, the Isin Lhasa period from 2000 to 1763. So Abraham was around 2,000 years this time, right? 2000, like 4,000 years ago to 3,900 years ago. After the collapse of Ur III, due to the Amorite and Elamite invasions, Mesopotamia fragmented. City-states like Isin and Lhasa took over central power. This was a time of chaos, migration, and shifting alliances, very in line with the kind of background Abraham's story suggests. Then there was the rise of Babylon under Hammurabi. Babylon wasn't dominant yet during Abraham's time, but was on the rise. If Abraham lived later, his lifetime might overlap with early Babylonian kings before Hammurabi. So the king that interacted with him wasn't a Babylonian king. It was just before, would have been an Amorite king. What's his name? What's Abraham's name? Abraham's name is Abraham ibn Tariq. Okay, so let's make one thing clear. These are renditions that we have as Arabs, that taken from the Jews, who had renditions of ancient names that they no longer were able to pronounce properly as well. By doing a linguistic analysis of these names, it's highly possible that we can trace them to their correct origin and their correct pronunciation, which would be very different from this, as we saw with the original names of the gods. Abraham ibn Tariq ibn Nahor ibn Saruq ibn Ragu ibn Palag ibn Ahir ibn Shaleh ibn Arfaghshad ibn Sam ibn Noah. So clearly these names don't mean anything, and some of them, like Arfaghshad, you can see some Arabic Persian influence in pronunciation. Ibn Sam ibn Noah, so Semite race, and then Noah being their father. The problem is forget the names. The problem is that this is a genealogy in the table of nations. We don't know how true this genealogy is and how many generations there were between these time frames. The one major problem in the Bible is that they believe that the earth is only 6,500 years old. So when you show them stuff that's older, or when you tell them that the Aborigines have lived for 75,000 years in Australia isolated, and that man has been looking like this, they don't believe it, right? As their act of faith, they don't believe it. So that's why all their names in the table of nations only have to go back so far. So we don't know how true this list is, how many ancestors are missing, or the veracity of this list here. But this is taken directly from Ibn Kathir, because this Ibn Kathir borrowed it from the Jews, right? They're semantic, but probably didn't sound as they are written, a linguistic studies, which is what I just said. So this is taken from the Bible. Abraham, his father's named, we say Tariq, right? But it's Tariq, or God knows the real rendition of this name, but let's assume Tariq. Let's give it a European twist, or a bend, or a flavor. Tariq. So Tariq was the father of Abraham, and Tariq had 3 sons. One son was Abraham, another son was Nahor, and another son was Haran. And Lot was the son of Haran. The Quran mentions the word Azar. We shall look at that next. Before we look at that, we have the idol worship of these people. So in Joshua, and Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates. Terah is Tariq, the father of Abraham and of Noah, and they served other gods." So the Bible is telling you that all of these people served other gods, and it's named the father of Abraham. Then God says, then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac. And then in the next verse, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and then it just carries on. The Quranic narrative on the other side says, indeed we bestowed aforetime on Abraham his portion of guidance, and we were well acquainted with him as to his belief in the oneness of Allah. Subhanallah. To the point, focused. Who remembers this? قبل أيام كثيرة جدا كان في قرية رجل مشهور جدا وكان اسم هذا الرجل آزر, the name of Abraham. وكان عزر يبيع الأصنام وكان في هذه القرية بيت كبير جدا وكان في هذا البيت أصنام كبيرة جدا وكان الناس يسجدون لهذه الأصنام. The people used to worship idols. وكان عزر يسجد لهذه الأصنام, and Azar, the father of Abraham, used to worship idols. وكان عزر يعبد هذه الأصنام, and Azar used to worship, he used to prostrate to the idols, and then he used to worship the idols. ولد Azar, the son of Azar. وكان عزر له ولد رشيد جدا, he had a son who was Rashid, very Rashid. وكان اسم هذا الولد إبراهيم, and the name of this son was Abraham. وكان إبراهيم يرى الناس يسجدون للأصنام, and Ibrahim used to see the people worshipping the idols. ويرى الناس يعبدون الأصنام. So he saw the people prostrating, يسجدون للأصنام, and then he saw them يعبدون الأصنام, worshipping the idols. وكان إبراهيم يعرف أن الأصنام حجارة, and Abraham knew that these idols were just made of stone. وكان يعرف أن الأصنام لا تتكلم ولا تسمع, he knew that these idols never spoke nor listened. وكان يعرف أن الأصنام لا تضر ولا تنفع, and he knew that these idols don't harm you and benefit you. وكان يرى أن الذباب يجلس على الأصنام فلا تدفع, and he would see the fly, Zubaba, sit on the nose of the idol, and the idol could do nothing. وكان إبراهيم يقول في نفسه لماذا يسجد الناس للأصنام, and he would say in his heart, why do these people worship idols? Why do they yasjudu? They bow down to these idols. This story gives you an idea of the personality of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And it's very different from the personality of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I hope that my battery lasts so that I can finish this off, otherwise I'll have to finish it off tomorrow. So Abraham's uncle was an idol maker. Now the Quran says Azar, right? Now I'm going to go with the narrative. Actually, I'll just stay neutral. Abraham's uncle or Abraham's father, depending on which version of the story you understand, was an idol maker. At this point, many people are going to be confused because some people have been told that Abraham's father was a Muslim, and others have been told, as the Quran says, that Abraham's father was a non-believer. So as I said, let's go with any narrative that you want to go with, and let's build the evidence, and then people can decide for themselves, and we'll showcase evidences from both sides. So in the Quran, Allah says, when Abraham said to his father Azar, do you take idols as gods? Indeed, I see you and your people in manifest error. So this is clear, the word Azar, and he calls him father. He says to his father. Al-Qurtubi says, Al-Qurtubi has recorded both views. He says Azar was the uncle, not the biological father, and this is supported by the Arabic usage of the word, where ab, father, can mean uncle. So another example, where would this fit in? When Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was with his uncle Abu Talib, and they were near Busra, and they stopped by a resting post where there was a monk, and the monk recognized the signs of Nabuwah on Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he made a feast, and he asked Abu Talib to bring everybody. Abu Talib left Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in charge of the camels, and they all went to the feast, and the monk was really looking for Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he looked around and he said, everybody's not here. And Abu Talib said, oh, sorry, we forgot one boy, we left him with the camels. And he said, I told you to bring everybody. So Abu Talib said, go and bring my nephew. Go and bring the boy. And then when Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came, the monk looked him up and down, and he said, where is his father? And Abu Talib said, I am his father. And he said, no, that can't be right, his father is dead. And he said, I am his uncle. So this is another reference to the use of the word father. So here, Al-Qurtubi says it can mean uncle, stepfather, guardian, or even forefather. People call their stepfathers father. People call their guardians mother or father. And Al-Suhaili, in his Rawad Al-Unuf, he also prefers the uncle opinion, emphasizing linguistic precision and prophetic lineage purity, which we'll look at further. Al-Samani and Al-Zamakhshari also recorded this interpretation amongst credible positions. The supporting argument for the uncle view in the Arabic language, ab, is broader. It means father and uncle, older uncle, younger uncle, stepfather, grandfather. All of these things can be encompassed by the word ab. Especially the paternal uncle. You know, you can imagine calling your paternal uncle ab, but not your maternal uncle. Like khal, you wouldn't call him ab, but your ammu, you would call him. So example, in the Quran, the word ab is used for Yaqub in Yusuf's story, even though he's the grandfather. Actually, I'm not too sure about that. Yaqub is Yusuf's father, not grandfather. I think there's a mistake here. Okay, preserving of the prophetic lineage. One other reason why this is many scholars held that all the forefathers of Rasulullah were pure monotheists. They rejected the idea that a prophet's direct father could be a polytheist or idol maker. Thus, Terah or Tariq or however you want to pronounce that name, is the real father, and which is what the Bible claims, right? And that Azar is the uncle here. There is a hadith that Rasulullah said that he came from pure loins, from pure. His blood is pure, his line is pure. Purity is twofold. There's the physical purity and the internal purity. The physical purity is that he wasn't the product of zina. All of his ancestors up to the time of our father Adam, see, look, I just used the word father. Our grandfather Adam were through wedlock, which made his ancestors pure, the offspring of pure, the offspring of pure, the offspring of pure. And then there is the internal, the spiritual, which is the religious line. So nobody from his ancestry was a non-believer, was a polytheist. They were all ritually, spiritually pure there as well. So they cite this as evidence because the greater purity would be the spiritual purity, right, over the physical purity. So the hadith, the prophets are born from noble fathers and pure wombs. Many scholars interpret this to mean none of their direct fathers were disbelievers. However, a lot of the exegesis of the Quran, especially the early ones, treat Azar as a father. Why? Because it's a literal translation of the tafsir, and this is the reason why. They say when the Quran says, إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ Azar. So when he said, "Oh my father," he said to his father, إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ, when he said to his father, Azar. That's a clear grammatical construction, meaning father as in his father. So this is the way they understand it. There's no compelling reason why anybody just looking at this verse on its own would want to give another meaning to it if they didn't have a strong hadith or other interpretations or other supporting evidences with it. If we just look at the Quran on its own, it's giving the understanding clearly father. At-Tabari, for instance, he has interpreted it like this. So this is a list over here of the two camps. On the left is Azar was the father, At-Tabari. His is the greatest tafsir, right? Al-Zamakhshari, Fakhruddin al-Razi, Al-Nasafi, Baghawi, Baydawi, Shawkani, Al-Ulusi, Al-Sa'di, and the early exegetists. On the other side, the other opposing camp, we have people like Al-Qurtubi, Suhaili, Sam'ani, Suyuti, Ibn Jawzi, Kazin, Shahrastani, and some scholars of the Asharite Maturidi traditions, and the later Sufia also, and many other scholars who were more concerned with genealogy, and then they would bring and cite evidence like the hadith we cited, and giving the arguments that, you know, to preserve a pure genealogy, this hadith would fit here, and then that means that you can then interpret Quran as grandfather, uncle, because of the supporting hadith, right? So who's right, who's wrong, that's not really important. I would like to lean towards the opinion that Azar was his uncle and his father was Terah. But if somebody wants to follow At-Tabari, if somebody wants to follow Nasafi, it's not a problem, right? This is not a thing where, you know, we need to get into two opposing camps and start doing takfir over each other and calling each other misguided. No, there's an idea behind both of them, and go with the idea. The point is to follow sound Islamic scholarship. And both opinions are sound Islamic scholarship. It's not like it's a fringe opinion or something like this. On both sides, we have great names, right? So now moving onwards, Abraham's reason for celestial worship. So if you read the story of Abraham, you read the story where he goes out into the night and he looks at the star and says, wow, this is something. This has to be God. And then it sets, and then he says, oh, I don't follow things that set. And then he looks at the moon and wow, this is even bigger and brighter and better, more beautiful. This must be my Lord. And then it sets as well. And then he says, poof, I don't follow things that set. And then the sun, wow, this is the biggest and brightest object we have here going on. This must be God. And then it sets. And then he says the same thing again. It's a very strange way of speaking. It's a very strange way of acting. What could be the possible and the reasons for this? We'll have a look. Let's first read the Quranic verses in English. Thus did we show Abraham the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, that he be one of those who have faith and certainty. When the night covered him over with darkness, he saw a star. He said, this is my Lord. But when it set, he said, I like not those who set. Fair enough, O Ibrahim, peace be upon you. When he saw the moon rising up, he said, this is my Lord. But when it set, he said, unless my Lord guides me, I shall surely be amongst the erring people. When he saw the sun rising up, he said, this is my Lord, this is greater. But when it set, he said, O my people, I am indeed free from all that you join as partners in worship with Allah. Verily, I have turned my face towards him who has created the heavens and the earth. And I am not of the mushrikeen, those who worship others beside Allah. So there's a clue in the text here. There's a few clues in the text here. And we'll refer to the clues in the text and the personality of Abraham when we look at a few more slides. So, going back, don't want to spoil it all. Let's analyze this. If we look at the personality of Abraham, do you remember when we read this here? When we were reading this text here, قبل أيام كثيرة جدا كان في قرية رجل مشهور جدا. When we were reading, yes, right. So Abraham would say, like the way it's building, you know, كان اسم هذا ولد إبراهيم وكان إبراهيم ويرى الناس يسجدون للأصنام ويرى الناس يعبدون الأصنام وكان إبراهيم يعرف أن الأصنام حجارة. Now, this is very pedantic. It's a teaching tool, but it's not entirely pedantic, because this fits in with the same other story. He knew this was happening. He knew this was happening. It's basically building up a narrative of how ridiculous of something am I observing here. So I'm observing, right? So he is making an idol, right? And then it doesn't work out properly, so he bashes it to dust again, and then molds another one. Okay, and then that guy's painting it. It doesn't paint properly, and then he throws it away. And then another guy finally makes the product, and then a fly sits on it, and then they give offerings to it, and the dog comes and laps up the offerings. And then, wonder of wonder, you know, I see my father bow down to it. I see the people bow down. I see the people prostrate. I see the people worship. What is this? It doesn't make sense. Abraham is a very different personality compared to other prophets. We tend to assume everybody as being very rigid, formal, like furrowed brows and not having light-hearted moments or having fun. Just look at the personality of Moses in the Quran. A very strong-willed, firm person. One slap, one punch, and he killed somebody. When the angel of death came for him, slapped him, took his eye out. And when he went up on Mount Sinai and received the 10 commandments, and when he came down and he saw that his people were worshipping the cow, what did he do? In anger, he smashed the tablets, God's tablets, like wahi, revelation for you. You smashed it. You grabbed your brother by the beard and the hair in front of everybody, and you're shaming him and saying, what did you do? And he said, my brother, it wasn't me, it was them. And Allah loved Abraham, by the way, but this was his firm personality. Then we have the mind-loving, generous, thoughtful, light-hearted personality of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but very deep in focus and concentration and in contemplation. A perfect balance. And then we have Abraham. And you can even kind of think that his style of preaching was a joking, a bit of like practical jokes. The way he handled the idols, which we look at when we get to that part. And the way he's mentioning this story. If you look at all of the stories of Abraham, very soon you can get an idea of his type of personality. And then it doesn't seem very strange what he's doing. So if any of you are under the impression that Abraham was a polytheist and Abraham didn't know his Lord, and Abraham was, looked at those idols and thought, yes, no, not sure. Then he goes out and says, that star's better than this idol. A man can't touch it, and it rises and sets when it wants, and it's risen by itself. Man didn't make it. Must be my Lord. Oh, no, it's set. Poof, not my Lord. Oh, the moon. The moon is bigger. Do you really believe that Abraham would do this? Right? It just sounds so strange, but there is wisdom in this strangeness. Just like we mentioned the strangeness in the fact that Abraham had to say, this is my sister. This is Abraham's personality. The personality of Abraham was he was showing his people, and we'll give you the proofs. So he's mocking. Abraham had a kind of personality, and you see it time and time again, where he subliminally mocks. It's like when people debate, right? In a debate, you can either be very passive or aggressive, or you know when to be passive, to give them rope to catch them, to give them something, and then you catch that. By that same rope you've given them, you hang them, right? So you need to know when to be aggressive in a debate, when to be passive, when to ensnare them, when to dominate them, right? When to get one over them, when to even make them look ridiculous in front of people. Right? So Abraham is a master of this. The Quran and the Hadith tell us this. This is Abraham's personality. So in this instance, Abraham is telling everybody, wow, look at that. That must be my God, man. That's it. And then it sets and he does like, nah. And then he looks at the moon. Wow. And then the same thing happens. And then the sun. Oh my God. And then the same thing happens. He's basically making a mockery of them people who worship these things. And then he says it here, right? He says here clearly, Allah didn't say, and then we gave him guidance. And then we gave him guidance and he believed. Abraham by himself had the guidance. And Abraham says, but when it's set, he said, O my people, I am indeed free from all that you join as partners in worship with Allah. He was using a device to deride and mock and show them how ridiculous they were. Right? So that's taking care of that now. So I hope you've understood this. Right? It puts that into perspective. And we'll give more evidence as well, inshallah. Now, something very interesting, which you probably haven't thought about and you should think about. Why did he mention these three? They worshipped many things. They had a whole plethora of deities that he knew, but he chose to mention these three. Why these three? And did you actually ever wonder how they worship those gods, or what the rites of worship were, or obviously they had them as idols, right? They must have had idols, and idols represent things. So if they have a man sitting there, that man is a god that represents the moon, for example, or the mountain, like Dashura for the Nabateans, or any other deity. They represent things. So what were the representations of these three idols, and why these three names, the sun, the moon, the star, and why? Here, have a look here at this next slide. This on the left is Ishtar, in the middle is Sin, and on the right is Shamas. Ishtar is the rising star, the first of the three that Abraham said, wow, this is my God. The second one is Sin, the moon god. Wow, this is the moon, it's bigger, this surely must be God. And then the third one, the sun, Shamas. So these are the representations, and these are the three gods that they used to worship. Ishtar, which was known as Inanna under the Sumerians, Sin, and Shamas. Arguably the most tutelar deities that they have. Right? And going back thousands, 2,000-3,000 years to the Sumerians as well. Inanna, Ishtar. Just changing the names from the Sumerians to the Akkadians over to the Amorites. It's like passing the mantle of the gods on, just blindly. So he's calling them out for these three gods. And if you look at the carving of Shamas, above him are the three symbols again. The star, the moon, and the sun. Right? So this is like a phenomenal understanding and a phenomenal find that we have here, that we actually have physical representations of the three gods that Abraham was calling them out on. I say gods because they worship these gods. Abraham didn't worship these gods. Abraham was mocking and deriding them. Here is the solar symbol of Shamas on a kuduru with the star of Ishtar on the left and the crescent Sin. So here you can clearly see, right? Do you remember I told you that this symbol of Ishtar and of Shamas is used by the Assyrian Christians on their flag to this day. Here are the three deities together. Ishtar, Sin, Shamas. Here you can see them again. Symbols representing Sin, Ishtar, and Shamas as depicted on the upper half of a kuduru of Meli Shapuk II. So here are the three deities of this specific king. You can see his dress, you can see his crown, and you can see something between him and the two people that are there. They're dressed differently, and you can see the throne there. And above his head are the three gods that they used to worship, the very three names that Abraham picked out. His people disputed with him, right? So further we have in the story, his people were disputing with him. He was obviously having debates with them. And in debates, you use these kind of rhetorical devices. He said, "Do you dispute with me concerning Allah? While He has guided me, and I fear not those whom you associate with Allah in worship. Except when my Lord Allah wills something, my Lord comprehends in His knowledge all things. Will you not then remember? And how should I fear those whom you associate in worship with Allah, while you fear not that you have joined in worship with Allah things for which He has not sent down to you any authority? So which of the two parties has more right to be in security? If you but know." So there's an idea here that it's possible that just like in the time of Rasulullah, they knew who Allah was under the name, whatever the name was, El, some rendition of the word El, possibly. Just like when Allah says in the Quran, if you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, surely they will say Allah. This is in reference to the Quraysh. But then they had lesser deities because Allah was distant for them. Likewise here it seems the same thing. The lesser deities like the sun, the moon, the star, and other deities are more closer. They interfere in everyday life, whereas Allah was the creator God who then distanced Himself from His creation. It seems like this. I don't know what the Mufassirin have to say on this, but this is what it seems like to me. Or the converse would be that he's telling them, my Lord is Allah. Are you disputing me about my Lord? I've given you the rational proofs. You still don't believe in Allah? You know, or possibly they didn't believe in Allah and they just had those deities. But I personally believe that they knew who Allah was, because the name is there. They knew who Allah was, whether clearly or whether they had somehow corrupted some understanding like the Christians, either clearly or through some corrupted understanding like the Christians have today regarding Allah Azza wa Jal. But I believe that they knew. So then, they who believe and do not mix their belief with injustice, those will have high security and they are rightly guided. So again, this gives the same kind of a feel, right, that they believed. That was our conclusive argument which we gave Abraham against his people. Ya Ilahi, Subhanallah. Allah is saying that was our conclusive argument which we gave Abraham against his people. So this was the argument Abraham's using against his people. We raise by degrees whom we will. Indeed, your Lord is wise and knowing. It is those who believe in the oneness of Allah and confuse not their belief with dhulm, wrongdoing. For them only there is security and they are the guided. And that was our proof which we gave Abraham against his people. We raise whom we will in degrees. Certainly your Lord is all wise, all knowing. I hope that's cleared everything up now. How many still confuse the story, right? I hope this has cleared it up. Now back to Abraham and his father. Let's have a look at the exchange between Abraham and his father. So he says, "O my father, Ya Abati, O my father, verily there has come to me of knowledge that which came not unto you," i.e. prophecy, i.e. wahi, revelation. "So follow me, I will guide you to the straight path." As-sirat al-mustaqim. "O my father, worship not Satan." Subhanallah. This is something serious here. Were they worshipping Satan? Were they also worshipping Satan here? Or was the idea here that they're so misguided, they're polytheists, and Satan has misguided them, and the word here is used like for their misguidance, worship not Satan. Literally, I will take it literal. Worship not Satan. It means they must have been worshipping Satan as well. Verily, Satan has been a rebel against the most beneficent. O my father, verily I fear lest a torment from the most beneficent overtake you, as that you become a companion of Satan in the hellfire. He said, i.e. the father, "Do you reject my gods, O Abraham? If you stop not this, I will indeed stone you. So get away from me safely before I punish you." Abraham said, "Peace be upon you." As-salam, salamu alaykum. Right? We know from the sunnah of Rasulullah, when the ignorant approach you and you realize they're there to cause trouble, just wish them a greeting of peace. It's in the Quran. And then just move on. Abraham said, "Peace be upon you. I will ask forgiveness of my Lord for you. Verily he is unto me ever most gracious, and I shall turn away from you and from those whom you invoke besides Allah." Recite to them the story of Abraham when he said to his father and his people, "What do you worship?" They said, "We worship idols, and to them we are ever devoted." He said, "Do they hear you when you call on them? Nor do they benefit you, nor do they harm you." They said, "Nay, but we found our fathers doing so." He said, "Do you observe that which you have been worshipping, and your ancient fathers?" So the word here, ancient, right? This is going back prehistory. "They are enemies to me, save the Lord of Al-Alameen." This translation, I'm not too comfortable with it. It's like I just copied and pasted it from a site on the internet. "Who has created me, and it is he who guides me, and it is he who feeds me and gives me to drink. And when I am ill, it is he who cures me, and who will cause me to die, and then will bring me to life again, and who, I hope, will forgive me my faults on the day of resurrection." Furthermore, and remember Abraham when he said to his people, "Worship Allah alone and fear him. That is better for you if you did but know. You worship besides Allah only idols, and you only invent falsehood. Verily, those whom you worship besides Allah have no power to give you provision. So seek your provision from Allah alone. You will be brought back. And if you deny them, nations before you have denied. If you deny the nations before you have denied their messengers, the duty of the messenger is only to convey the message plainly. See they not how Allah originates creation, then will repeat it? Spelling mistakes here from the website as well. Verily, that is easy for Allah. Say, travel in the land and see how Allah originated creation, and then Allah will bring forth the creation of the hereafter. Verily, Allah is able to do all things. He punishes whom He wills and shows mercy to whom He wills, and to Him you will be returned. And you cannot escape in the earth or in the heaven. And besides Allah, you have neither any protector nor guardian, any wali nor any helper. And those who believe in the proofs of Allah and the meeting with Him, it is they who have no hope. And those who disbelieve, it is those who have no hope in the mercy of Allah, and it is they who will have a painful torment. So this is the to and fro, right? So he's debating with them, Allah's revealing verses, he's giving them the verses, and then what happens? He concocts a plan. What does he do? He waits for the day of a celebration where all of them go out. Now again, we're going to see the same style of personality, right? He waits for everybody to go, and then he does what? The famous story, we all know this. Let's have a look at it together. So there was a festival, everybody went out, and he was left alone in the town. I think his father said to him, are you coming? He said, no, I'm not feeling well. And then he stayed behind. He took an axe and he goes to the idol now. Now what happened when the Rasul went to the idol? He went to the idols and he smashed the idols. No talking, no anything. You know, they've been here in the Kaʿbah, polluting the Kaʿbah, outside the Kaʿbah. Smash, smash, smash. Oh Ali, help me. Raises Ali on his shoulders, smash, smash, smash. But Abraham is a bit of a jokey type of a personality, has some, mockery in him for the ridiculous, and so you should. So he goes to the idol now, just like he went to the star and the moon. He now goes to the idol, and he stands there with his axe. And he sees the food on the floor. So he must be thinking, he's looking at it, like with like a mirth or a smile on his face, thinking, okay, food, idol, okay, what are you going to do with it? And then he says to the idol, this food there, are you not going to eat it? Now, if you would be crazy to think that he's actually talking to the idol. He's mocking the whole scene. He's mocking the idol, the scene, and the greater people who are not even there. Right? The idol cannot hear him, the people cannot hear him, but he's mocking everything. Right? He says, will you not eat of the offering before you? The Quran is verifying this. What is the matter with you that you do not speak? So they were silent. The idols didn't reply. So he said, what's wrong? You're not speaking? Mockery upon mockery. Go there, Abraham, like the personality. He then proceeded to smash the idols up. And then he put the axe next to one of the idols, the largest idol, either put it around his neck or by his side, and left. Now the idolaters, they came back and they saw who had done this to our gods. And then let's hear what the Quran has to say. And we had certainly given Abraham his sound judgment before, and we were of him well knowing. So when he said to his father and his people, what are these statues to which you are devoted? They said, we found our fathers worshipping them. He said, you and your fathers in manifest error. They said, have you come to us with the truth, or are you of those who jest? Look at that clue there again. He said, no, rather your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, who created them, and I too that am of those who bear witness. So either they knew that he was a bit of a practical joker, or they were then saying, are you playing with us? Prophets don't lie. He's talking the truth. And I swear by Allah, I will surely plan against your idols before you have turned and gone away. Why we read this verse again? Just to show this line here. He told them clearly, he said, by Allah, wallahi, I'm going to deal with your boys. I'm going to deal with those rocks and stones. right? So he made an open threat. He didn't even do it in secret. So that's when they realized it must have been him. I swear by Allah, I will surely plan against your idols after you have turned and gone away. So he made them into fragments, except a large one amongst them, that they might return to it and question. They said, who has done this to our gods? Indeed, he is of the wrongdoers. They said, we heard a young man mention them who is called Ibrahim. Abraham. They said, then bring him before the eyes of the people that they may testify. They said, have you done this to our gods, O Abraham? Now Abraham could have said, yeah, I did it. I told you, I took an oath I was going to do it. I did it. But look at the personality of Abraham. Look at the jesting, the joking, the mocking, the deriding, the making fun of them, putting them in their place. Even at that point, he knows the outcome, severe punishment and death. He's still got time for a joke. And he says, we'll let the Quran speak. They said, have you done this to our gods, Abraham? He said, rather, this, the largest of them, he did it. So ask him if they should be able to speak. This is clear, making fun of them, right? So there's three things here you can observe. He says, they asked him, did you do this? And he said, rather, it was him. Ask him. And then he said, if they can speak. So he's basically mocked them again. He knows he's going to die, and he's mocking them. He's deriding them. He's telling them how ridiculous they all are. So they turned around and said, so they returned to blaming themselves and said to each other, indeed, you are the wrongdoers. So they realized what Abraham was trying to say. You know, like how silly, we worship things that couldn't protect themselves and couldn't answer. We are the silly ones, right? Then they reversed themselves. Satan butted in again. That was an opening for them. These are the openings that the prophets create for you, right? You get these openings for a second. This was a knock. This was a sledgehammer to them. This was a sledgehammer given to their idols that was also a sledgehammer to them. And it opened them up momentarily. Sometimes somebody needs a slap, sometimes a sledgehammer, sometimes a kind word, sometimes a hug, sometimes a kiss, sometimes throw a rose at them. These guys needed this treatment, and it opened them momentarily. So what we learn from here is different strokes for different folk. Not in that way, in the correct way, right? In the way that I'm applying it here. Means that you give da'wah differently to different people. So here he had to give da'wah to them in this way. Their hearts momentarily opened up. Satan whispered again, and because they were just so inclined towards their gods, the opening went and it closed. And then they reversed themselves, saying, you have already known that they do not speak. He said, then do you worship instead of Allah that which does not benefit you at all or harm you? The fact that he says, then do you worship instead of Allah, means that they knew, right? This is further proof for me that they worshipped Allah. They knew Allah at that time. They said, burn him and support your gods if you are to act. Basically, we've had enough. We can't take this talking, because each time you talk to us, our mind shakes, our soul shakes, our body shakes. We accept what you're saying is the truth, but we don't want to listen to it. Just like the Quraysh, thousands of years later, another ancestor of Abraham, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with another people, the Quraysh, with another family, prophet to a family, saying the same thing. Allah said, O fire, be coolness and safety upon Abraham, and they intended for him harm, but we made them the greatest losers. So now enters the story of the fire. Most people are taught that, we'll have a look here. Most people are taught that the fire was so big that anything that flew over it burnt and fell down dead into it. They had stoked it for weeks, and it was as large as a swimming pool and as deep as a swimming pool. Number one, we're talking about city-states that don't have wood to waste like that. Why would you stoke a fire for a week or a month just to burn one man, right? And does it make sense that you're burning like tonnage of firewood just to burn one man, and to have a fire going for weeks before you burn him? You know, soundly that story is not true. we know from history up till the present day, when you want to burn someone, it's normally burning at the stake, right? The Christians are experts at this one. Burning at the stake, the Romans also. Right? You tie them to a stake and you burn them. Or in this particular case, you make a pit and then you just grab someone who's tied up and you throw them in. These are the only two ways that you're going to burn anybody. Nothing more elaborate than this. At that point, then there is the theological aspect of the story. The angel came and Abraham said, I don't need your help. Allah didn't send you. And Allah said, be coolness to the fire. And this was a miracle. And they found him not burning and they let him go. Even then their hearts still didn't change. If your hearts are completely closed off, summum bukmun umyun fahum la yarji'un. Allah's made them deaf, dumb and blind and there's no return for them. The point I'm getting at here is that this is the story. He's thrown into the fire. The idea that it was also a catapult. They say that the fire was so big they bought a catapult and they catapulted him in. Catapults and trebuchets hadn't been invented back then. Right? So, a little bit of history and common sense will tell you about these stories. But we believe in the Quranic story, it was a fire and they threw him in. And then comes the part of the king. It wasn't the king that organized this. People think that it was Nimrod, that the king ordered for this. This is before the entrance of the king. This was his own people. So we're talking his immediate family, his villages, and the temple, the few villages or the city, state, the small city he was in, that main temple, he smashed up everything. It was those people only. Catapults had not been invented, nor was the fire of crazy dimensions. The angel Gabriel came to Abraham for his help. O fire, be you coolness and safety for Abraham. They wanted to harm him, but we made them the worst losers. You see two different translations translated differently. So now enter the king. Who is this king? Again, there's another misconception everybody has. Who is the king? I'll ask you and you'll reply to me and say to me, it's Nimrod. Okay, then Habibi, show me where it says in the Quran he's Nimrod. Show me in a hadith where he says he's Nimrod. Let's get this fact straight as well. So, king back then, now think about this. Kings back then were chiefs. It's city-states, so each city was like its own state, right? Or a bigger king had 2 or 3 cities, and each city was on the banks of the river. So he would have been a tribal chief. He would have been a king, you can say. He would have been an elder. He would have been a priest king, like this. So imagine somebody like this. A king with an additional title or just a king. Allah says, have you not considered the one who argued with Abraham about his Lord? Because Allah had given him kingship. Now, kingship gets to people's heads. Back in the day, many of them would deify themselves. Right? The Egyptians, the Sumerians, and even one Amorite king. They make themselves into gods. This particular king, this arrogant king, thought himself everything. And he's like, who is this young person coming here and causing upset and seeding doubt into people's heads about our lifestyle? Because don't forget, temples bringing money as well, right? It brings in money to the temple, to the priest, to the, and I'm sure the king takes his share as well. And then when Abraham said, my Lord is the one who gives life and causes death, he said, I give life. Because obviously he's asked Abraham, now who's your Lord? Abraham said, my Lord is this, the one that gives life and takes life. And he said, I give life and cause death, i.e. I can spare a prisoner and I can kill a prisoner. Abraham said, indeed, Allah brings up the sun from the east, so bring it up from the west. So this is again mockery, right? He said, my Lord is the one who brings it from the east. So go on then, big boy, bring it up from the west. So this is Abraham's personality, and most people don't think like this, right? And it's amazing to think how Abraham's personality is, right? And it's very lovable, very endearing indeed. So the disbeliever was overwhelmed by astonishment, and Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So nowhere in these verses is the name Nimrod mentioned. He's called a disbeliever, he's called a king. That's it. So who is this mythical Nimrod that everybody goes on about? The Quran is silent, and surprise, surprise, the Bible is silent about this particular king story as well. There is a king called Nimrod in the Bible, but he's not related any way in the same time frame or the location. The location may have been the same, but the time frame of Abraham. Nimrod is somebody else, a very early figure going back to the time of the Sumerians, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The Midrash mentions this story. The Midrash is a collection of oral tafasir, you can say, narrations and like commentaries on biblical quotes and understandings, where the Jews try to understand certain verses. Like we have commentaries on the Quran, you can say this is like their commentary. The name is mentioned in there. The Bible has Nimrod as a descendant of Cush and the builder of Babylon. Here's the verse given. He is a pre-Abrahamic figure by a long time. He's very close to the time of Noah. I think he's only two descendants, or one descendant away from Noah. It was Cush, the grandson of Noah, and then Cush, he was the son of Noah, something like this. So the name Nimrod comes from the Hebrew root marad, meaning to rebel, or he rebelled. So again, this is like a name given to him. His real name was something else, and this is the name eventually that ended up with him. They called him Nimrod. Like we call Abu Jahl. His name is Abul Hakim, right? Like the servant of the wise. He had a beautiful name, but because he was Jahil, he's forever known as Abu Jahl. So Fir'aun and Nimrod, they had names, but they're forever known as those titles now. Abraham, it seems like, had a name as well that was other than Abram. So he who revolts against God, the defier, the rebel. This is the semantic feel of the word Nimrod. Who are the possible contenders for this particular person? So we are looking at contenders, i.e. the king that's possibly, a king that was in the possible timeline of Abraham, that we can say was the king mentioned in the Quran. Not a character called Nimrod, because there is no story in hadith or anywhere. There's actually one or two, I think, there's one weak hadith regarding this, that there were four kings. There's a weak hadith regarding there were four powerful people in the world at some time in prehistory. Two of them were believers, which was Dhul Qarnayn and I don't know the second one, and two were disbelievers. One was Nebuchadnezzar and the second one was Nimrod. So weak hadith. And then the commentators who use the story of Nimrod in the Quran, they take it from Rawayat Israeliyat. They take it from Jewish stories, right? So they're just Jewish stories. They're stories that they've taken from the Israelites to add commentary, possible story to add something to the Quran. So you can kind of get an understanding, okay, a king, possibly Nimrod, that's it. But there's no evidence that there was a king called Nimrod to this date, and that he was actually Nimrod that had this correspondence with Ibrāhīm alayhi salam. It was a king, and the only possible contenders we have, remember we went through all the evidence, we have to look at two Amorite kings around the same time. Now we don't have king lists. We have Sumerian king lists, Egyptian king lists. We have king lists of the Sheban kingdom, the Saba, but we don't have proper king lists for the Amorites. But we have a few names. So we have a name called Sin Muballid. So Sin is from the moon, right? So this is a prefix. So it's a theophoric name. Around about the timeline of Abraham. He was king of Babylon before Hammurabi. Hammurabi is a bit later. He was before, a generation or two before. And that's a possible contender. He was the father of Hammurabi, actually. Famous for legalism and central power, Babylon rose rapidly under his rule. Assertive, expanding authority. Possibly the strongest historical candidate that we have. I didn't find a picture of him online. I don't think we have anything. And there are cuneiform tablets from his time and everything, and I didn't post. So there are cuneiform tablets. I didn't post them because you couldn't just post anything. I want to tie in as close as I can to this particular person. Then we have a second king. His name is Rimsin, the first of Lhasa. Lhasa was one of the city-states of the Amorites. Again, look, Rimsin. He ruled Lhasa. He was a powerful city near Ur. known for his long reign and dominance of southern Mesopotamia, likely had control over Ur. The family of Ibrahim al-Islam's lived in that particular area. Another candidate was a Sumerian South Mesopotamian king. I deleted this, by the way. His name is very close to the word Nimrod, right? His name is Rodnamu or something like this, but the time frame is off, right? But you know, the name is kind of close, and he deified himself, right? He made himself into a god. But when I realized the timeline was off, I deleted it. I think I kept it here. I'll just delete it now from the slide because I don't need it. So this is a figurine, right? I don't know if this is the actual king. It's quite pathetic if it is. It looks like some kind of a potter or a farmer, right? He's wearing a futa, traditional, the wraparound, the waist wrapper, and there seems to be writing on it, cuneiform writing. Rimsin foundation figurine. This is the time frame of Ibrahim al-Islam, and this is in the University of Chicago. When Abraham realized that no one else was going to believe in his call, he decided to emigrate. He left his people and traveled with his wife and Lot to a city called Ur, then another called Haran, and then Palestine. Okay, he was already in Ur, and then he went to Haran, and then he went to Palestine. So he went to en route. I'll show you the map. There's a map here, right? Allah said, so Lot believed in him. He, Abraham, said, I will emigrate for the sake of my Lord. Verily, he is the Almighty, the All-Wise. So Abraham made a decision to leave. So Abraham now leaves. And this is the route here. This map here, by the way, is taken from an Islamic book, a very old book that I've got lying around. So here you can see Ur, right at the bottom of Iraq by the marsh areas. And you can see the sea, the inland sea. Actually, Basra is by the sea. But these are the marshlands, right? So have a look at the marsh Arabs, by the way. I mentioned it yesterday. Have a look at the marsh Arabs, and you'll get an understanding of their culture. So he immigrated along the river Euphrates, and then he gets to a place right at the top of the Fertile Crescent, and he goes up towards Haran, which is in Anatolia, northern Syria, Anatolia. This is where now the Kurdish people live. And then he comes down again, and then he goes past the region of Aleppo, Halab, and then he goes down the same route today. That same road, by the way, links these cities. And this is the same road that only 3 months ago, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham came down, and they took control over Damascus. The same route. And then he carried further on, right? He went into the land of Canaan. And then he went through Sinai into Egypt. The Bible says there was a famine. Now the wife and sister story. Genesis says, as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. So the Bible actually gives a lot of clarity on the same story that we mentioned yesterday. I say yesterday because the electricity went midway during the talk, and then I had to stop for the night, and now I'm doing it again. So maybe there's a difference in style. I'm actually quite tired today, so that's why I'm not as lively and as coherent as I was yesterday. Apologies. 3 such incidents had occurred in the Bible. We mentioned Abraham and Pharaoh, Abraham and Abimelech, and then Isaac and Abimelech as well, right? Abraham in Gerar. So this kind of a story has been mentioned 3 times in the Bible. These incidents happened with Abraham 3 times. The Quran only references 1 such incident. And just something to look at, I added this as an extra. The Quranic titles for the rulers of Egypt. When it came to Musa al-Islam, in Surah Yusuf, Allah says, وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ إِنِّي أَرَى سَبْعَ بَقَرَاتٍ سِمَانٍ. So verily I see 7 fat cows, right? وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ. The king said, not Fir'aun, the king says. And the king said, indeed, I saw in a dream 7 fat cows. Musa, when it comes to the story of Musa in Surah Taha, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Right? So go towards Pharaoh. Allah is saying, go to Pharaoh. Allah's used this Egypt, kings of Egypt, right? Allah's now using the word Pharaoh and not king. Why am I saying this? Is because we know today that there were different dynasties, and the Pharaonic house was a specific dynasty that lasted a set number of generations, and then we have had another dynasty, the Hyksos, I can't spell it, Hyksos, it says it there in the bottom. At the time of Abraham, again, it wasn't Pharaoh, right? But the Bible always references it as Pharaoh, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. So for those who claim that the Quran copied the Bible, there's your proof. The Quran doesn't reference Pharaoh except for during the period of Moses and the Pharaonic household, right? It mentions them correctly as not pharaohs. With Ibrāhīm alayhi salam, there's a hadith, we have a hadith, not a Quranic ayah, about Abraham and the tyrant king in Sahih Bukhari, right? The word فَإِنَّ هَذَا الْجَبَّارِ, it references this king as a tyrant. So he is a tyrant, for verily he is a tyrant. Right? The Prophet said that Abraham entered the land of a tyrant king who would seize beautiful women. And it's never called Pharaoh, it's just called a tyrant king. Inna ya'lama annaki amradi aghlibini alayk. Lam yathhab Ibrāhīm alayhi salam illa thalatha kadhab. So here it says Lam yathhab Ibrāhīm alayhi salam illa thalatha kadhab. So Ibrahim didn't lie except 3 times. This is referring to this, right? The first time was when he said, I'm sick. And then when he said, she's my sister. And the third time was so وَوَاحِدَةً فِي شَأْنِ سَارَةٍ. So in her protection. فَإِنَّهُ قَادِمَ أَرْضَ الْجَبَّارِ, because they were entering a land of a tyrant. وَمَعْهُ سَارَةٍ, and then Sarah was with him. وَكَانَتْ أَحْسَنُ النَّاسِ فَإِنَّ هَذَا الْحَجَرِ. So this was a tyrant, al-Jabbar. In يَعْلَمْ أَنَّكِ. So it's not mentioned it here. It's basically just saying that he lied 3 times, right? And one of those was when he said, this is my sister. And one of them was when he said, your big boy did it. And the third one was when he said, I'm sick. I think that's the third one. Right? The hadith doesn't represent this here. It's basically the main idea I'm trying to show you is that it's mentioned him as a tyrant, not as a pharaoh. So likely Egyptian dynasties during the time of Prophet Abraham. So we looked at who the king was, possibly who the king was that dealt with, that Ibrāhīm alayhi salam dealt with. Now, who was the king who Abraham had this thing with? So, the time frame, we have to look at the 12th century dynasty, the 12th dynasty and the 13th dynasty, right? So, this is circa 1991 to 1800 BCE. So, this is the time frame around Abraham was alive, we think. So in that dynasty we had many rulers, by the way, but the main ones I'm going to give their names first because it's more probable. Amenhotep, so in its original it's Imen. Imen is like Amen, it's one of their gods, right? There's Aten and there's Amen and like this. So Amenhotep, so the theophoric name as usual. So from number 1, number 2, number 3 and number 4. These are the contenders. Egypt was wealthy, organized and capable of royal reception, and also if there was a drought, it was wealthy, they would go there and things would be okay for them. So who are these contenders? The first one, Amenemhat. The first, this is his image here. This is what so it's possible this is the king that wanted the wife. Or this one, this is in a museum in Berlin. This is number 2 contender. Or Amenhotep, I don't know how to pronounce these. This is the 3rd contender in the museum in Moscow. And this is a 4th one. It was rebuilt. The head was like resculptured again because it was damaged. This is in the British Museum. So these are the 4 likely contenders that any one of these here, you're seeing representations of a king that had that conversation with Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is fascinating to look at. The actual king list is much more greater. So, I mean, you can just look here, right? So there are figures in between, right? And one of them, Senuseret, very high plausibility, agriculture expansion and regional stability. There are reasons for these names, but I don't want to get into the whole, historical analysis of why this king, why that king. It takes away from what we're trying to achieve here. But those four main kings, and then there's a few kings in between, possible contenders. It's basically from the 12th dynasty, from that time frame. Then we have the 13th dynasty. We have a possibility, but slightly lower. So we have these kings here, right? We have like this name here, Sakemere and Nerake and Sonbef. These names are that we pronounce them today, right? These aren't the original pronunciations of the particular names of those kings, by the way. Just take some medicine, 1 second. And there are more kings. So there are actually a lot of kings that we don't want to talk about. The 12th dynasty, confirmed and relevant, are actually 8 rulers. So between the Amenemhats, there are other rulers. So you can say any one of them. But the reason we don't show them is because sometimes it's not easy to get a lot of information on them. Right? So in the 13th dynasty, for example, there's 60 or 70 kings spanning a 150-year period. We sometimes we don't know their name. We have names only, sometimes on a scarab or sometimes in a mention somewhere, but we don't have any royal seal, any royal title, name, or any bust or any stele or anything like that. So it's no point going through hundreds of pharaohs. Those are our main contenders. It could be any one of them. Here's some more names here. So based on the estimated timeline, this guy looks like he could be. Right? He fits perfectly with the timeline. He engaged in foreign trade, which included Canaan and Babylon. Babylon would be northern Canaan, Lebanon area today. So this means that channels were open. So in the drought, it was easy for them to just walk in. Famine, sorry. So Abraham, now let's focus on Abraham. So we've gone full circle. We started off with the city, then we looked at the Amorites. They came from in the middle. Then the argument with the Amorite king in the middle. His own people left his people, went to Canaan, and then in Canaan went down. Okay, we've covered the story now. Let's look at the figure Abraham. What do we know about him? His name and things like that. So the original form of his name in Hebrew is Avram, right? Why? Because it means exalted father. So this gives it away that this wasn't his original name. Possibly his original name was something else. It means exalted father, father, Ab in Arabic, Ram, exalted high. Right? Why the changing? Because they added Ha or Ham to interpret as reference of Hamon Geon, a multitude of nations, which indeed the Bible says that he shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and I shall make his progeny great. And this is the Ishmael's line. And Allah will not say I would make them great if they were all upon misguidance, as the Jews and the Christians believe, right? And this is in one of the earliest lectures on Sīrah. So that's Avram, Avraham, Abram, Abraham, Ibrāhīm is understood as father of many nations. The Arabic form Ibrāhīm, like we have Ismail, Ibrāhīm, Mikael, Israel. Right? These are Arabic renditions, Pharaoh. These are Arabic renditions of names that originated either in Hebrew or in other languages. Like Jibrāīl. Jibrāīl we think is actually a Aramaic name. Gabra. El is a theophoric name. El is the name of God. So Elohim, right? So Michael, Israel, and names like that. Jibrail. So derived from the Hebrew, Abraham, through phonological shifts typical of Semitic language transmission. Arabic often uses lah as a prefix in Semitic names adopted from Hebrew. So Ishaq for Isaac, Ishaq for Isaac, and Ismail for Ishmael. So if we take the first I away, it would be Ishaq or Ismail or something like this. Right? So the transformation from v to b is common when shifting from Hebrew to Arabic, because the Hebrew lacks b, and the sound natively is Avram, but Arabic lacks the v. So Arabic doesn't have v, it's wah. So where I'm sitting now, people often say pilof, right? Because in actually when it's written in the Nastaliq Farsi script, which the Russians did away with, and then it became Cyrillic, and then now it's Latin script, they write the waw is not pronounced, right? When we say pilau as in rice, it's a Persian word. The Afghanis, Pakistanis, Indians, and Central Asians use the same word. It's written with the waw, but because the waw in the Persian language, and people who speak Urdu know this, it becomes va, right? So for example, door doesn't become darwaza, it becomes darvaza, right? And so pilau, because in the Farsi it's written with the waw, they pronounce it the va, and in English they actually write pilof. So people will actually say pilof, but it's pilau. So likewise with the Hebrew, the same thing happens. And I mentioned yesterday that Jesus, Isa, Yesu, Joshua, Jacob, Joseph, the J is a later addition because it didn't exist. It exists in Latin, and these are in Greek, and these are Greek-fied names. The original names in Hebrew sound different, right? Like Yusuf and Yahya and Yaqub. These are the original, and then these are our Arabic pronunciation of Jewish names. The Jews pronounce them slightly differently. So the ending im, like im, is a common Semitic plural or honorific extension in Arabic names, potentially adding to elevate the form or mirror the Hebrew plural honorific construction. Thus, Abraham, Ibrāhīm, the name retains its meaning and sanctity across languages, father of many or exalted father. This, my brothers and sisters, dearly beloveds, is Abraham, the father of many nations, the father of many. And what a story, what a prophetic story. And then if you read what prophet stories, because then there's a whole line of prophets that comes underneath him. And then right at the end, there's another line that starts, and the best of creation, Muhammad al-Mustafa al-Habib, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi sallam. He comes from them. So you can only imagine the father of many. You know, of course, you are going to have a wondrous story, because everything else that came after you is wondrous. We're coming to the end of our story here now. So again, it's Abraham. In Greek, it's Abram, in Latin, Abraham, and in English, Abraham, in Arabic, Ibrāhīm. We know the further story from here that concerns us as Muslims is that he was asked, you know, he was given a maid, some say a princess, some say a slave, it doesn't make a difference. He was given Hagar, Hajara we say, he was given Hagar, and then the Bible says that, you know, she got pregnant, Sarah got jealous, and he separated them. That's not true in real life. That didn't happen. The real story was Allah ordered him to take his wife to Mecca, a barren valley, Becca, leave her there. Thus starts the story of Prophet ﷺ. That was the seed that led to the story of Rasul ﷺ coming many generations later. And inshallah, next week, we shall start on this. So I'm not going to mention the story of how he got there. Everybody knows it, and that's for, if you want to study that story, you can study that in the whole story of Abraham, which will cover this, and then the theological mysteries and things like that. You know, the love anecdotes and everything like that. So just quickly moving on. I think this is the same thing. We've done this. Yep. So this is it. So Just one last thing here. The Quran often preserves the majestic form of names while shifting their pronunciation to align with Arabic phonology. The name Ibrahim occurs 69 times in the Quran, denoting his exalted status as the friend of Allah, Khalilullah. So we have Habibullah, which is the high station, and then the second high station is Khalilullah. We have 5 major prophets. They are Noah, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, and Rasul Muhammad Rasulullah. Right? Khalilullah is the friend of Allah. You have Habibullah, Rasulullah, Habibullah, right? Khalilullah, the friend. And then you have the one who spoke to Allah. Musa, Kalamallahu, Musa Taklima. He spoke with Allah. He's known as the one who spoke with Allah. And then there's Isa, Ruh Allah, from the Spirit of Allah, i.e. from the command, the word. Allah had the angel Gabriel blow the Spirit, life into him from Allah. And then there is Nuh alayhi salam, the great prophet of the flood, right? And references and parallels of that story are found in the Sumerian flood legends, right? The story of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish, which is the creation myth. And if we are to study, inshallah, I hope to do this, make dua for me, to study the story of Noah, we'll go through the same archaeological evidences and historical and linguistic points, and we'll mention the story of Gilgamesh. And when we study Abraham, we look at the Enuma Elish and creation myths from around the world, inshallah. So this was, it was my most pleasurable lesson. And why? Because it involves the direct ancestor of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw him in paradise, and he said he represented me the most, right? And he was talking about how he saw Moses, and Moses was very dark, like the people of a particular tribe that were known for being very dark. And then he saw somebody else, and he said that he looked like this companion, like this. And one companion said, will that have any effect on me? And he said, no, it's just, like a look-alike, right? And Abraham looked like Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Like father, like son. Subhanallah. What a beautiful progeny and what a beautiful grandfather. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. And we have to read as-salawat upon Ibrahim and his progeny. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على أسعد ما محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نور الهدى محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.